The day has ended so softly that you can barely mark the moment when the last patient left. You are still sitting on the low wooden stool beside your work table, and the room around you holds only the quiet memory of small voices and careful footsteps. Outside the high, narrow window, the light has begun its slow change from pale gold into something cooler, the color of grey-blue wool washed many times. You do not move yet. There is no reason to hurry, and the stillness is pleasant after a day spent bending close to bruised shoulders and scraped knees. Your medical corner is tucked at the back of a modest building in a quiet provincial town, far from the crowded streets of Rome. The walls are whitewashed and uneven, smoothed by a hand that was not in a rush, and the floor is made of packed earth covered here and there with woven rush mats. A single shelf runs along one wall holding a neat row of clay jars in varying sizes, each stopped with a fitted cork or a piece of waxed linen. One jar contains dried whole sage leaves, another crushed fennel seed, a third soft goose grease mixed with a little beeswax, and there are many more besides, each labelled in your own small, tidy writing on a shard of pottery. Under the shelf stands a sturdy wooden chest with a flat lid, inside which you keep rolled bandages of different widths, clean linen scraps, and the softest wool for padding splints. Everything has its place, and the order of the room is a quiet comfort. You let your eyes rest on these familiar things without needing to name them, and your breathing slows. The air is warm and still, carrying a blend of scents that have lived in the room for so long they seem to belong to the walls themselves. Dried thyme, old olive wood, a trace of sour wine vinegar from a jar left open to air, and the clean, almost dusty smell of powdered clay. None of these smells is strong or sharp. They have mellowed together into a single soft presence, like a well-warmed blanket. The window, set high in the wall to catch the day's best light, shows a rectangle of sky that is now deepening gently. You watch it without expectation, observing the way the pale grey-blue shifts toward a darker shade, like watercolor spreading slowly through wet paper. There are no clouds to break the color, only an even, gradual dimming. A single bird calls somewhere beyond the rooftops, a short, low note that asks nothing and fades at once. No other sound follows, and you find that you are perfectly content to sit and let the evening arrive at its own pace. Your hands rest on your thighs, the palms turned upward and relaxed. The fingers are stained faintly from handling green herbs and from crushing charcoal for stomach complaints, but the stains are old and worn in. You can feel the slight stiffness in the knuckles that comes from many small repetitive tasks, mixing pastes, rolling pills, holding a needle steady, and you know the stiffness will ease once you begin the slow work of cleaning your instruments. But not yet. For now, you simply notice the quiet and let it soak into you. The work table in front of you is made of dark, seasoned oak, its surface smoothed by years of scrubbing with sand and water. A shallow groove runs along the front edge to catch spills, and the wood is marked here and there with faint, paler rings where a hot pot once stood. At the center of the table sits your water basin, a wide, shallow dish of terracotta with a simple greenish glaze that has crackled into fine lines over time. Beside it lies a folded linen cloth, clean but not new, its edges slightly frayed. Further to the left sits a small, unlit pottery oil lamp with a short spout and a handle shaped like a loop. Next to the lamp is a clay cup holding a thin stick of dried rush, which you will use to transfer flame when the time comes. At the far edge of the table, rolled and tied with a leather thong, waits your instrument roll. You do not look at it directly yet. It is simply there, patient as everything else. You reach forward slowly and take the oil lamp in both hands, turning it over without any urgency. The clay is cool and lightly textured, the shape friendly to the touch. You check the oil level by tilting the lamp slightly and seeing the amber liquid move against the inner wall. It is more than half full, enough for a long evening. You pull the wick up a little, just enough so that the dried tip stands clear of the spout. Then you pick up the rush stick, dip it into the flame vessel kept safe in a niche near the hearth, a small covered pot of coals that stays lit through the day, and bring the tiny fire to the wick. The flame catches with a soft, almost silent puff, and you set the lamp down on the table where it will stand for the rest of the night. The light is small and golden, barely more than a cupped hand of warmth in the growing dimness. It does not chase away all the shadows. Instead, it makes them softer, drawing them close around the edges of the room like a heavy curtain. The flicker is so gentle you can scarcely see it move, a steady, upright flame with a tip that wavers only if you breathe too close. You adjust your stool a little, pulling it nearer the table, and the wood makes a low, muffled sound against the rush mat. Then you settle again and let the quiet return. Now the window is no longer a source of light, but a panel of deep blue-black, and the lamp has become the room's sun. The clay jars on the shelf catch the faintest gleam on their rounded sides. The chest under the shelf sits in comfortable darkness. You can see the grain of the tabletop running in long, wavy lines, darker now under the lamplight, and you trace one line with your fingertip without thinking. The motion is slow, mindless, and it helps you arrive fully in the evening. Your attention drifts to the sounds that remain when all the day sounds have stopped. There is no murmur of voices from the street, no footsteps, no clatter of cartwheels. The town has settled into its own quiet routines, families sharing a meal, lamps being lit in other rooms, a dob circling on a doorstep, and then lying down with a sigh. From somewhere far away, so distant that it is almost not a sound at all, you can just make out the low, continuous hum of the countryside at night, perhaps the movement of air through olive trees or the faint, rhythmic pulse of insects in the dry grass. It is a sound that asks nothing of you and expects no reply. You become aware of your own weight on the stool, the way your feet rest flat on the mat, the way your back is straight but not stiff. A day spent leaning over a work table can leave a small dull ache between the shoulder blades, and you roll your shoulders once, very gently, just enough to feel the muscles loosen. The movement makes your tunic, a simple off-white garment of light wool, shift against your skin. The fabric is soft from many wearings and smells faintly of the lavender sprigs you keep in your closed chest. You exhale, and the breath makes the lamp flame quiver for half a heartbeat before it steadies again. You think briefly of the people who came to you today, not of their ailments. Those have already faded into simple tasks done and put away, but of their faces in the morning light. There was a young girl who had fallen and scraped her knee on a stone step. You cleaned the small wound with water and a little vinegar, then spread a thin layer of honey salve on a linen patch and tied it gently. There was an older man with stiff hands from many years of working with cold river clay. You warmed a small amount of oil with rosemary and rubbed it slowly into his knuckles, and he left, walking easier. An infant with a heap rash, a woman with tired eyes who only wanted a calming tea, a young boy who had a splinter from a fig branch. All of them came and went, and none of them left worse than when they arrived. Your work is simple, steady, and good, and it does not follow you into the evening. The thought passes, and you let it go as easily as you let go of the day's light. You turn your gaze back to the table, and now your eyes rest on the folded linen cloth beside the basin. It is time to begin, but not in a way that demands speed or pressure. The tasks that wait for you are as gentle as the darkening sky, a series of small familiar actions that will carry you smoothly from evening into night. You know them by heart, laying out the tools, rinsing, soaking, wiping, polishing, rinsing again, drying, oiling, and finally wrapping everything away. Each step will take as long as it takes, and none of it will be rushed. You pick up the linen cloth and shake it out once, letting it float down onto the table in a fresh position, then smooth it flat with your palm. The cloth is unbleached and pale brown, woven tightly and soft from many washings. It will be the bed for your instruments while you work, keeping them from rolling and protecting the wood. You take a moment to straighten its edges, aligning them with the edge of the table, and then you sit back again. There is no hurry. The lamp continues to burn with its small, steady sound, just the faintest whisper of oil being drawn up. The wick. You rest your hands on the cloth and feel the texture under your fingertips, the fine ridges of the weave, the slightly cooler temperature of the fabric where it has not yet absorbed your body heat. The room is so still that you can hear the soft creak of the building settling, a sound so ordinary you barely register it. You glance toward the dark window and see nothing but your own reflection thrown back by the lamp, a dim shape with shoulders and a head translucent against the night. Beyond the glass, the world has become a single deep color without edges. There is no moon yet, no stars visible through the small opening, only the calm, complete darkness that comes before the stars have fully woken. You find yourself thinking that this is the best time of the day, the interval between the last of the light and the first true hour of night, when nothing is expected and everything can be done slowly. Your breathing has become so even that you almost forget you are breathing at all. The air is cooler now, carrying the slight earthiness of the packed floor and a hint of distant dew. You might later wrap a light blanket around your shoulders, but for now, your tunic is enough. You rest one hand on the edge of the table and let the other lie in your lap, palm up and open. The flame burns without flickering, and you watch it for a long, unhurried moment, noticing the way the golden light pulls on the glazed surface of the basin and turns the dull clay jar of sage into a soft, rounded glow. You think of water. You will need fresh water for the first rinse, and that water waits in a tall clay pitcher just outside the door, kept cool in the shade of a small covered porch. The well is only a dozen paces away, and you drew the water earlier in the afternoon, when the sun was still high. The memory of that action returns without effort, the rough rope in your hands, the sound of the bucket meeting the water far below, the weight of it as you pulled it up hand over hand, and the clear, cold splash as you poured it into the pitcher. That water has been sitting all afternoon, losing its chill and becoming cool without being cold, exactly right for cleaning bronze. You will go and fetch it soon, but not quite yet. You find yourself thinking about the instruments waiting in their leather roll. You have not unrolled them since the last patient left, and the roll sits on the far edge of the table like a sleeping animal, dark brown and unremarkable. You know every tool in sight, the 2 scalpels, one larger with a leaf-shaped blade and one smaller with a curved belly. The slender double-ended probe with a tiny olive tip on one end and a smooth, blunt point on the other. The blunt forceps with their gentle grip. The sharp hook used only to hold back skin that was already cut. The sturdy bone lever that had not been needed in many months. And the fine-toothed comb-like instrument for cleaning grit from wounds. Each one has a name and a place, and each one has been handled so often that it feels like an extension of your own hand. But you do not reach for the roll yet. There is a pleasure in the waiting, in letting the mind rest fully on the present before the hands begin their work. You know that once you untie the leather thong and open the roll, you will fall into the rhythm of cleaning, and that rhythm will carry you all the way to bed. So you allow yourself a little more stillness, a little more time to simply exist in the warm circle of lamplight. The flame dips suddenly a tiny movement, as if some invisible current of air has passed through the room and then rises again, steady as before. The slight disturbance draws your attention back to the lamp, and you notice that the oil level has dropped only a fraction. You could work for many hours and still have light. That thought is reassuring in a way that does not need to be explained. You shift your weight on the stool, crossing one ankle over the other, and then you rest your folded hands on the table. The position is comfortable, and you let your gaze unfocus a little, not looking at anything in particular. The objects on the table become a soft arrangement of shapes and colors, the pale circle of the basin, the small dark block of the lamp, the lighter rectangle of the cloth, the rolled cylinder of leather. There is a quiet beauty in the scene, the kind of beauty that asks for no audience. Outside, the single bird calls again, closer this time, and then goes silent. You listen to the silence that follows and find it deeper than before. It is the silence of a town at rest, of doors closed and shutters fastened, of children already asleep, of embers banked under ash. It is a silence that you have known for many years, and it has never grown old. Eventually, without making a conscious decision, you feel your body beginning to lean slightly forward, as if drawn by a gentle gravity toward the work ahead. The shift is small, almost imperceptible, but you recognize it for what it is, the first quiet signal that you are ready, not hurried, not driven, just ready. You will stand, walk the few steps to the door, bring in the pitcher of water, and set it beside the basin. You will untie the instrument roll. You will begin, but that will happen when it happens. For this single, suspended moment, you are still seated, still watching the flame, still breathing the blended scents of herbs and vinegar and old wood. The day is fully gone now, replaced by a night so calm it feels like a held breath. The room holds you, and you hold the stillness, and nothing else is required. You let the moment stretch a little longer. The lamp burns, the house rests, and the sky outside the high window continues its slow, invisible journey toward morning, unseen and unhurried, as it has done every night since the room was built and will do for countless nights to come. You are simply here in the last light of the medical corner, and that is enough. The stillness of the room has settled so completely that even the small flame of the oil lamp seems to have grown steadier, as though it too has accepted the slow pace of the evening. You remain seated on your wooden stool, your hands resting lightly on the folded linen cloth, and the objects on the table, the basin, the lamp, the cloth, and the leather roll, exist together in a quiet arrangement that asks nothing of you. The window is now fully dark, a rectangle of deep, unbroken indigo, and the only light in the world is the warm gold circle that surrounds your hands. You let your gaze rest on the instrument roll for a moment longer, noticing the way the lamplight runs along its curved surface, picking out the soft sheen of leather that has been handled for many years. Then, without hurry, you reach forward and take it in both hands. The roll is heavier than it looks, compact and dense with the weight of the bronze inside. You lift it from the table edge and bring it to the center of the linen cloth, setting it down with a gentle muffled sound, the kind of sound a well-made object makes when placed on soft fabric. The leather is a deep, dark brown, almost the color of rich earth after rain, and it has been worn smooth in some places while remaining slightly rough in others, creating a map of use that only your hands know how to read. You let your palms rest on the outer surface, feeling the familiar texture cool at first, then slowly warming under your touch, and the faint, pleasant smell of old olive oil that rises from the material is as familiar as the scent of the room itself. The leather thong that holds the roll closed is a single strip of the same dark hide, about the width of your smallest finger and long enough to wrap twice around the bundle before tying in a simple, secure knot. You pick up the loose end, which has been tucked under the first loop, and begin to unwind it slowly, feeling the slight resistance where the leather has settled into its customary shape. The knot is not tight, merely snug, and it comes undone with a few patient movements, the thong falling away to either side. You place the strip of leather to one side of the cloth, straightening it into a line, and then you look at the roll itself, still closed but free now to be opened. You rest your hands on either end and pause, not because you are reluctant or tired, but because there is no reason to move quickly. Opening the roll is the beginning of the evening's work, and it deserves the same gentle attention you would give to unfolding a letter or peeling back the husk of a fresh fig. You take a slow breath, and in that pause you notice the soft creak of the stool as you shift your weight, the distant, almost inaudible hum of the night outside, and the steady, quiet hiss of the lamp drawing oil up the wick. Then you begin. Your left hand holds the roll in place, while your right hand lifts the top flap, which is actually the front edge of the leather folded over and tucked beneath. The hide is supple despite its age, bending without cracking, and it opens with a low, papery rustle. You fold the flap back and smooth it flat, revealing the first inner layer of thin, undyed wool that lines the roll and cushions the instruments. The wool is a pale cream color, flecked here and there with tiny dark specks that are not dirt, but the natural character of the fiber, and it smells clean and airy, with only the faintest hint of the bronze it has cradled for so long. You then lift the far edge and fold it back as well, so the roll lies fully open, a long strip of leather and wool running horizontally across the cloth. Inside each instrument rests in its own pocket, a narrow sleeve of the same soft wool stitched into the leather with small even stitches of linen thread. The pockets are arranged side by side, each one shaped to hold a particular tool, and the outlines of the bronze are visible as gentle ridges beneath the pale wool. You can see the curve of a scalpel blade, the straight line of a probe, the branching shape of the forceps, all waiting in their quiet beds. The sight is deeply familiar, yet you never tire of it. There is something quietly satisfying in the order, in the way every piece has its exact place. You let your eyes travel from left to right, noting each pocket and the tool within, before you touch anything. The lamplight falls across the open roll, deepening the shadows in the seams and giving the wall a warm, creamy glow. The bronze, where it peeks out from the tops of the pockets, catches the light in tiny, bright glints, like the first stars appearing in a darkening sky. You then lift your hand and choose the first pocket on the left, the one that holds the larger of the two scalpels. Your fingers find the edge of the tool where it protrudes slightly above the wool, a smooth, cool handle of solid bronze. You grip it gently, feeling the familiar thickness, and draw it out of its pocket with a slow, steady pull. The scalpel comes free without resistance, and you hold it up in the lamplight, turning it slightly to see the blade. The handle is a simple rod, rounded at the end and slightly wider in the middle to fit the palm, and it is marked with a fine patina of age, not dullness, but a deepening of the bronze into a soft honey-brown color that only time can produce. The blade itself is leash-shaped, wide at the belly and tapering to a fine point, with a cutting edge that runs along the inner curve. It is not sharp enough to cut now, but you can see the faint, even line where the metal has been honed many times, a testament to its quiet service. You lower the scalpel to the linen cloth and place it down carefully, aligning it with the top edge so that the handle points to your right and the blade faces upward. The bronze makes a very faint musical tap as it meets the fabric, a sound so small it might not reach the walls. You then look at the empty pocket where the scalpel had lain, noting the slight indentation it left in the wall, before moving your attention to the next pocket. The second scalpel is slightly smaller, and its pocket sits just to the right. You draw it out in the same unhurried manner, feeling the balance of it in your hand. Its handle is a touch thinner, and the blade has a gentle, sweeping belly that curves outward before returning to a point, like a slender leaf caught mid-drift. The bronze is the same warm weathered color, though this one has a faintly brighter patch near the tip where the oil has not yet darkened it. You hold it beside the first scalpel for a moment, comparing not their shapes but the way the lamplight moves across them differently, one reflecting a soft diffused glow, the other a sharper, almost polished gleam. Then you set the smaller scalpel on the cloth, next to the larger one, adjusting it slightly so that the two lie parallel, separated by the width of your thumb. Your hand moves to the third pocket, which is narrower and longer. Here waits the slender probe, a double-ended instrument that serves many quiet purposes. You slide it out, and it comes into the light as smoothly as a fish slipping through shallow water. The probe is made of a single length of bronze, no thicker than a writing reed, and each end is shaped with care. One side has a tiny olive-shaped tip the size of a small bean, perfectly smooth and rounded, while the other end is a blunt point, slightly flattened, used for gentle probing. The metal has a satiny finish, worn to a soft gleam by years of careful handling, and as you turn it between your fingers, you see the light roll from end to end in a continuous, liquid line. You lay the probe on the cloth above the scalpels, its length stretching across the width of the fabric, and the olive tip catches the lamp and holds a small, golden bead of light. The fourth pocket is wider and divided into two channels, and from it you withdraw the blunt forceps. They are made of two arms of bronze, hinged not with a pin, but by a clever, flexible curve of the metal itself, so that they open and close with a gentle, springy tension. The gripping ends are broad and flat, like the beak of a duck, with fine, cross-hatched teeth that allow a secure hold without causing harm. You test the movement once, pressing the arms together, and then releasing them, and they bounce apart with a soft, resonant twang that vibrates briefly in your fingers. The sound is pleasing, and you repeat the motion a second time just to feel it, before setting the forceps down on the cloth. They lie open, their arms relaxed, as if resting. Next is a pocket so slim it could almost be a seam, and from it you pull the sharp hook. This instrument is simple, a bronze handle that swells at the grip and tapers into a slender, curved neck ending in a small, acute point. The hook is designed to lift and hold, not to cut, and the point is fine but not needle-sharp. The bronze here is darker, touched by the oils of many hands, and the curve of the neck catches the light in a single bright crescent. You place it on the cloth above the forceps, its hook facing away from you, a quiet, patient shape. The bone lever comes from a pocket that is noticeably heavier, and you need both hands to draw it out smoothly. The lever is a thick, solid piece of bronze, about the length of your forearm, with one end flattened and rounded like a small blunt chisel, and the other end shaped into a comfortable egg-like grip. Its weight is substantial, and you feel it pulling down against your palm, a reminder of the dense metal from which it is made. The surface is smooth but not polished, with a dark, almost smoky patina that has settled into the metal over countless quiet years. You look at the broad flat end, seeing your own dim reflection in its muted surface, a shape without detail, before laying the lever at the very top of the cloth, where its weight holds the fabric steady. Finally, there is the cleaning instrument, a fine-toothed comb carved from a single strip of bronze, with tiny, even teeth like a miniature saw. It rests in a pocket lined with slightly thicker wool to protect the delicate teeth, and you take special care as you draw it out, supporting the length with your whole hand. The teeth are so small and regular that they seem almost like a natural formation, like the fine bones of a tiny fish, and they catch the light in a series of tiny, winking points. The back of the comb is smooth and slightly arched, and it fits against your fingers as though it were made for them alone. You place it on the cloth last of all, completing the row, and the arrangement is now whole. You sit back on your stool and let your eyes travel over the instruments spread before you. They lie on the pale linen like words on a page, each one distinct, and yet part of a greater whole. The lamplight plays over the bronze, picking out highlights on the curved blades, the polished tips, the rounded handles, while the deeper shadowed areas recede into a dark, velvety brown. The cloth holds them gently, and nothing moves except the flame, which continues its quiet, upright dance. Your hands, now empty, rest once more in your lap. You feel the slight coolness of the air on your fingertips where they had touched the metal, and you notice the way the weight of each instrument seems to linger in your palms, a phantom memory of bronze. You are in no hurry to begin the next step. The instruments are out, the roll lies open, and the night is still young and deep around you. There is only this moment, the simple presence of these quiet tools, and the steady, peaceful rhythm of your own breathing. The instruments lie on the linen cloth in a neat, patient row, their bronze surfaces catching the lamplight in a dozen different ways. The two scalpels rest side by side, the larger leaf-shaped blade beside its smaller curved companion. The slender probe stretches across the top. The blunt forceps lie open below. The sharp hook, the heavy bone lever, and the fine-toothed cleaning comb complete the arrangement. They are waiting, and you are ready to begin their first rinse. The stillness that has filled the room now feels like a held breath, and you release it softly, leaning forward to take the terracotta basin in both hands. The basin is a wide, shallow dish, its rim no higher than the width of your thumb, and its diameter broad enough to hold both your hands side by side. The clay from which it was made is a pale, earthy red, covered on the inside with a greenish glaze that has crackled over time into a web of fine, darker lines. The glaze is not glossy but matte, like the skin of a winter squash, and it feels cool and smooth under your fingertips. The outside of the basin is unglazed, left in its natural state, and it has a slightly gritty texture that grips your palms as you lift it. The basin is not heavy, but it has a pleasant, solid weight that speaks of good clay and careful firing. You place it at the center of the work table, directly in front of you, and adjust its position until it sits squarely on the linen cloth, the rim perfectly level. Now the basin needs water, and that water waits outside. You rise from your stool slowly, feeling the muscles in your legs stretch after sitting for so long, and you walk the few steps to the door. The door is made of wooden planks, slightly warped with age, and it swings open without a sound because you oiled the hinges with olive oil last month. You step into the small covered porch, and the night air meets you with its cool, clean breath. The sky is deep and dark, scattered with the first faint stars, and the air smells of dry earth and distant herbs. The water pitcher sits just to the left of the door, a tall clay vessel with a narrow neck and a single handle, and it rests in a shallow dish of the same unglazed terracotta. You bend down, take the pitcher by its handle, and lift it with both hands, feeling the pleasant weight of the water inside. It is cool, but not cold. The afternoon warmth has long since faded, leaving only a mild, refreshing coolness that is perfect for cleaning bronze. You carry the pitcher back inside and set it on the table beside the basin, taking care not to knock it against the wood. The lamplight shines through the narrow neck, illuminating the water level within. It is 3/4 full, more than enough for the evening's work. You then return to the door and close it gently, feeling the latch click into place, and the room closes around you once more, warm and safe and utterly still. You return to your stool and sit down, drawing the pitcher closer. Pouring the water is a slow, deliberate act. You lift the pitcher with your right hand, supporting its base with your left, and tilt it over the basin. The first stream of water emerges from the narrow mouth in a steady, clear arc, and it strikes the glazed surface with a soft, musical sound, a low, liquid note that fills the quiet room. The water spreads across the basin floor in a wide, circular sheet, and you watch as the level rises gradually, climbing up the greenish glaze in tiny increments. Small air bubbles appear where the water meets the clay, clinging to the surface for a moment before releasing and floating upward to pop soundlessly. The sound of pouring shifts slightly as the basin fills, becoming deeper and fuller, until finally you straighten the pitcher and stop the flow. The basin is now 2/3 full, a shallow pool of clear, still water that reflects the lamplight in a trembling golden circle on the ceiling above. You set the pitcher aside, resting it on the table where it will be within easy reach, and then you look at the water. It is perfectly calm now, the surface smooth and unbroken, and it holds a faint, clean smell, the smell of well water that has been drawn from deep underground, filtered through layers of sand and stone. There is no odor of iron or clay, only a pure, almost sweet freshness. You dip your fingertips into the basin to test the temperature, and the water feels cool against your skin, exactly as you expected. Neither too cold to be comfortable, nor too warm to be effective. The sensation is pleasant, and you leave your fingers submerged for a moment longer, feeling the water's gentle pressure before withdrawing them and wiping them dry on a corner of the cloth. Now the first rinse begins. You reach for the larger scalpel, the one with the leaf-shaped blade, and pick it up by the handle, holding it lightly between your thumb and first two fingers. The bronze is cool from resting on the cloth, and its familiar weight settles into your palm as though it belongs there. You lower the scalpel into the basin, blade first, moving slowly so as not to disturb the water more than necessary. The surface parts with a soft, liquid sound, and the scalpel sinks until the blade is fully submerged and only the very end of the handle remains above the water. You hold it there motionless and watch the water close around the bronze, a thin, clear sheath that magnifies the metal and makes the blade appear slightly larger and softer. Then you begin to turn the scalpel, rotating it slowly between your fingertips, and the water swirls in tiny, lazy eddies around the blade. The lamplight strikes the wet bronze differently now, scattering into 100 small shifting glints that dance across the surface. Tiny air bubbles, which had been trapped in the microscopic crevices of the metal, are released and rise in wobbling lines toward the surface, where they vanish without a sound. You watch them go, one by one, and then you use the pad of your index finger to rub gently along the flat of the blade, feeling the smooth metal under the water. There is no visible dirt. Your instruments are never allowed to become truly soiled, but there is a faint, almost imperceptible film left by the day's use, and your fingertips brush it away with soft, circular motions. You work from the base of the blade, where it meets the handle, down to the very tip, and then back again, covering every part of the metal with the same patient, even pressure. When the blade feels clean under your touch, you lift the scalpel out of the water. It emerges dripping, and you hold it over the basin for a moment, letting the excess water run off in a series of clear, round drops that fall back into the pool with small plinking sounds. The wet bronze is darker than it was, its color deepened to a rich, warm brown that glistens softly in the lamplight. You place the scalpel on a dry section of the linen cloth, separate from the other instruments, and it leaves a faint, damp outline where it rests. Next, you pick up the smaller scalpel, the one with the curved belly. You lower it into the basin just as gently as the first, and the water receives it with the same soft, liquid sigh. The curved blade creates a different pattern of ripples, little arcs that radiate outward and then fade. You turn it slowly, watching the light move along the curve, and then you use your fingertips to rub the blade clean. The motion is the same, but not identical. Your hand adjusts to the smaller size, the tighter curve, and your touch becomes a little lighter, a little more precise. You trace the cutting edge without pressing, simply following its line with a gentle finger, and the water carries away whatever tiny particles might have clung there. When you lift the scalpel out, the drops fall like beads from the pointed tip, and you set it beside the first scalpel on the cloth. The slender probe is next. Its length makes it slightly more awkward to handle underwater, and you take care to hold it at the middle, balancing it so that neither end dips too deeply. The probe slips into the water with barely a sound, and you rotate it between your palms, feeling the smooth, satiny metal roll under your fingers. The olive-shaped tip at one end and the blunt point at the other each receive their share of attention. You rub the olive tip in gentle circles, polishing it to a soft gleam, and then you draw your fingers down the entire length of the shaft, wiping away the water itself as though you could remove even the memory of use. The probe emerges clean and glistening, and you lay it on the cloth above the scalpels, where it forms a long dark line against the pale linen. The blunt forceps come next, and they require a slightly different approach. You dip them into the water and then open and close them several times underwater, feeling the gentle springy resistance of the bronze arms. The water flows between the flat, cross-hatched gripping surfaces, and you use your thumb to rub along the teeth, working the water into the fine grooves where no visible particle could hide, but where, perhaps, a tiny speck of something might have lodged. The forceps make a faint, muted clicking sound as they open and close, a sound softened and deepened by the water, and you repeat the motion a few times until you are satisfied. Then you lift them out, letting the water drain from between the arms, and you place them on the cloth with their arms slightly apart, as if they were resting. The sharp hook is simple to rinse. Its single curved point enters the water and you rotate it slowly, rubbing the point and the curved neck with the softest touch, careful not to press too hard against the fine tip. The water makes the bronze look almost black, and the hook casts a thin, wavering shadow on the bottom of the basin. When you lift it out, the small point holds a single suspended drop of water for a moment before the drop releases and falls. You set the hook down, its curve facing away from you, and it lies there quietly, still and clean. The bone lever, being the largest and heaviest instrument, requires both hands to rinse properly. You cup it in your palms and lower it into the basin, feeling the water rise slightly as the solid bronze displaces it. The lever sinks to the bottom with a soft, muted thud, and you leave it there for a moment, letting the water soak over its entire surface. Then you lift it just enough to turn it, rubbing the broad, flat end with your whole palm, moving in slow, sweeping circles that cover the wide area. The darker patina on the metal seems to deepen underwater, becoming almost smoky, and the weight of the lever makes every movement deliberate and grounded. You run your fingers along the egg-shaped handle, tracing its smooth curves, and then you lift the lever out of the basin with both hands, water streaming from its surface in a dozen little rivulets. You place it on the cloth, and its weight presses the damp linen flat. Finally, the fine-toothed comb. You handle it with extra care, supporting its entire length as you lower it into the water. The tiny teeth enter the surface with a faint, almost musical tinkling, each tooth creating a minuscule disturbance that spreads and fades. You hold the comb underwater and use the pad of your thumb to stroke along the teeth, moving from the base to the tips in a single, continuous motion, and the water carries away anything that might have been caught there. The teeth are so fine that you barely feel them under your thumb, just a faint, regular texture like the edge of a leaf. You repeat the motion several times, slowly and patiently, until you are sure every tooth is clean, and then you lift the comb out and set it on the cloth. The teeth hold tiny sparkling droplets of water between them for a moment before the droplets join and fall. With all the instruments rinsed, you lean back on your stool and look at them. They lie on the damp linen in a new arrangement, still orderly but slightly shifted from their earlier positions, and the water has changed their appearance. The bronze is darker, richer, and each surface glistens with a fine, even sheen of moisture. The basin of water, which was so clear before, now holds the faintest hint of cloudiness. Not dirt, just the natural result of rinsing metal that has been handled all day. You see the tiny suspended motes drifting in the water, and you know the rinse has done its work. You reach for the basin and lift it carefully, carrying it across the room to the waste jar that stands near the door. The waste jar is a larger terracotta vessel with a wide mouth, and you pour the used water into it, watching it stream from the basin in a smooth, unbroken flow. The cloudy water swirls briefly before settling, and then you return to the table and set the empty basin down. You will refill it later for the second rinse, but for now it sits empty, its greenish glaze still damp and shining. You wipe your hands on a dry corner of the cloth and look once more at the row of wet bronze instruments, and then you let your gaze drift toward the lamp, where the flame continues its quiet, steady work, and the night stretches on, calm and unhurried, around you. The instruments lie on the damp linen cloth, their bronze still glistening from the first rinse, and the room holds the quiet, clean scent of well water, now mingling with the older, deeper smells of herbs and oil. The basin sits empty at the edge of the table, its greenish glaze still wet and shining in the lamplight. And you know that the next step is not another rinse, but a soaking in something sharper, something that will lift away any lingering film and leave the metal truly bare. You rise from your stool, and the movement is slow and smooth, your tunic brushing softly against your legs as you walk toward the shelf to gather what you need. The shelf holds a row of clay jars, but your eyes move past them to a small amphora that stands at the far end, a vessel no taller than the length of your hand from wrist to fingertip. It is made of the same pale terracotta as the basin, but its shape is narrow and tapering, with a small pinched mouth and two tiny loop handles near the neck. The surface is unglazed and slightly rough, and someone long ago painted a simple faded band of dark red around its widest part, a decoration so old that it has become more of a shadow than a color. You take the amphora down with both hands, feeling the light, hollow weight of it, and you carry it back to the table, setting it beside the empty basin. Then you turn again to the shelf and reach for a taller jar, the one that will hold the soaking bath. This jar is unlike the others. It is made of unglazed clay, left in its natural, smoky grey-brown state, and it stands as high as your forearm. Its walls are thick and sturdy, and the inside is smooth from years of holding liquids, though the outside is textured with the fine horizontal ridges left by the potter's fingers. The mouth is wide enough for your hand to pass through easily, and there is no lid, only a simple, flat piece of fired clay that rests on top to keep out dust. You lift the jar with care, cradling its bottom with your palm, and place it on the table directly in front of you, positioning it so that it sits squarely on a dry section of the cloth. Now, with the amphora and the jar both waiting, you pause for a moment and let the stillness settle around you. The lamp burns steadily, its flame a small upright golden leaf, and the shadows on the walls are deep and still. You listen to the silence and hear only the faint, distant hum of the night and the soft, almost imperceptible sound of your own breathing. Then you reach for the amphora, uncork it. The cork is a small tapered plug of beeswax-soaked linen, and set the cork aside. The smell of vinegar rises at once, sharp and clean, cutting through the heavier scents of the room like a sliver of cold air. It is white wine vinegar, made from the local grapes that grow on the sun-facing slopes outside the town, and it has been aged in a small wooden cask until it became clear and bright and fiercely sour. You tilt the amphora over the tall jar and begin to pour. The vinegar emerges in a thin, steady stream, pale as water, but with a slight amber tint that catches the lamplight and turns it into a ribbon of liquid gold. It splashes softly against the inner wall of the jar, and the sound is higher and thinner than water, a light, sharp pattering that gradually deepens as the level rises. You pour slowly, watching the vinegar climb up the inside of the jar, and you stop when the jar is a little less than half full. The surface of the vinegar is perfectly still, reflecting the flame as a tiny, trembling star. You set the amphora down and cork it loosely, then push it to the back of the table where it will not be in the way. The sharp smell of vinegar now fills the room, but it is not unpleasant. It is a clean, bracing scent that makes the air feel fresh and awake. You know that the smell will soften as the herbs are added, and you turn your attention to the shelf once more, where the dried rue and rosemary wait in their own small jars. The rue jar is a squat, wide-mouthed pot with a fitted cork lid, and you take it down and place it on the table. You remove the cork and look inside. The dried rue leaves are small and bluish-green, curled into tiny, fragile shapes, and they give off a faintly bitter, medicinal scent that reminds you of old gardens and sun-warmed stone. You reach into the jar with your thumb and forefinger and take a small pinch, feeling the dry, papery texture of the leaves as they crumble slightly between your fingertips. You hold the pinch over the tall jar and let the leaves fall, and they drift down toward the vinegar in a slow, scattered descent, some of them catching the light for a moment before they land. They spread across the surface, floating like tiny boats, and where they touch the vinegar they begin to darken and soften almost at once, the sharp liquid drawing out their oils and turning their color from dusty blue to a deep bruised green. You take a second pinch, slightly smaller than the first, and release it in the same way, watching the leaves scatter and settle. Then you take a third, and this time you crumble the leaves between your fingers into even finer pieces before letting them go, so that a fine green dust hangs in the air for a heartbeat before falling into the jar. The surface is now dotted with rue, each piece a small dark speck on the pale amber vinegar, and the scent that rises is changing. The sharpness of the vinegar is still there, but it is now layered with a dry, herbaceous bitterness that is soothing in its own quiet way. You replace the cork on the rue jar and set it aside, then reach for the rosemary jar. This jar is taller, with a narrow neck, and when you open it the smell that comes out is entirely different, warm and resinous, like the memory of a hillside in full sun. Inside, the dried rosemary sprigs are stiff and brownish green, their needle-like leaves still attached to the woody stems. You select a single sprig that is about the length of your longest finger, and you draw it out carefully so as not to crush the leaves. You hold it up to the lamplight and see the fine, silvery underside of each leaf, the tiny dried flowers still clinging here and there, and the rough, woody texture of the stem. Then you lower the sprig into the jar, letting it slide through the neck and into the vinegar, where it sinks slowly, trailing a few loose leaves that spiral downward. The sprig comes to rest on the bottom, its tip pointing upward, and the vinegar begins its slow work of softening the leaves and releasing their oils. The smell that rises from the jar now is something new, a blend of sharp, bitter, and warm that fills the room without being strong. It is a clean herbal scent, the kind that belongs to a well-kept still room or a quiet apothecary corner, and you breathe it in slowly, letting it settle into your senses. The rue has begun to sink, many of the tiny fragments now drifting just below the surface or slowly tumbling downward, and the rosemary sprig stands still in the pale liquid, its leaves darkening and becoming pliable. The surface of the vinegar is no longer perfectly smooth. It is dotted with herb particles and crossed by the faint, nearly invisible currents that move as the leaves absorb the liquid and sink. You let the jar sit for a while, doing nothing more than watching. The lamplight falls on the tall clay vessel, casting a warm glow on its ridged exterior, and the vinegar inside is a column of quiet amber that seems almost to glow from within. The herbs move very slowly, some floating downward with a lazy, tumbling motion, others drifting sideways as if caught in a gentle underwater breeze. A single rosemary leaf detaches from the sprig and rises halfway up the jar before pausing, suspended, and then sinking back down to rest on the bottom. The rue has mostly settled now, forming a thin dark layer on the bottom, but a few tiny fragments still hang in the liquid, too light to fall, and they give the vinegar a faint, misty quality. You are ready now to place the instruments into this bath. You turn back to the damp linen cloth where the bronze tools rest, and you begin with the larger scalpel. You pick it up by the handle, the metal still cool and slightly damp from the rinse, and you lower it slowly into the jar. The blade enters the vinegar with a soft, liquid sound, and the liquid parts around it, the herbs swirling gently as the bronze displaces them. The scalpel sinks until it rests on the bottom, the handle leaning against the inner wall of the jar, and the vinegar closes over it, submerging the blade entirely. Through the pale amber liquid, the bronze looks darker and softer, its edges blurred by the slight distortion of the vinegar and the glass-clear column of light. The smaller scalpel follows, sliding into the jar beside its larger companion with the same gentle care. You position it so that the two blades do not touch, letting them rest a finger's width apart. The probe is next, and because it is so slender, you lower it vertically, guiding it down until the olive tip touches the bottom and the blunt point stands just above the surface, a tiny dark nub in the lamplight. Then you add the blunt forceps, opening them slightly so that the vinegar can flow freely between the arms, and you lower them in, watching the liquid seep into the crosshatch teeth. The sharp hook goes in next, its curved point entering first, and the heavy bone lever requires both hands again. You lower it carefully, and its weight makes it settle at once onto the bottom of the jar, with a muffled, distant tap that you feel more than hear. Finally, the fine-toothed comb slips in, and you place it so that its teeth face upward, resting against the side of the jar where the liquid can move freely through each tiny gap. Now all the instruments are in the jar, submerged in the vinegar and herbs, and you sit back on your stool to watch. The scene before you is one of complete stillness, the tall clay jar standing like a quiet sentinel on the table, its contents suspended and silent. The bronze tools are dark shapes in the amber liquid, their outlines softened, their surfaces glinting faintly where the lamplight manages to reach through the vinegar and the floating herbs. The rosemary sprig has shifted slightly, one of its leaves now touching the handle of the larger scalpel, and the rue has settled into a fine dark sediment on the bottom, a soft bed for the instruments to rest upon. Nothing moves except the slow, almost imperceptible drift of a few remaining rue particles that still float in the middle of the jar. They rise and fall with currents so gentle that you could not feel them as you dipped your finger in. Currents caused only by the slight differences in temperature between the vinegar and the room. One tiny fleck of roux hovers at eye level for a long, motionless moment, then abruptly sinks a finger's width, then pauses again, as if deciding whether to fall or stay. You watch it with a quiet, unfocused attention, the kind that asks nothing and expects nothing, and the minutes pass in a smooth, unmeasured flow. The sound in the room is almost non-existent. The lamp makes its eternal soft whisper. The building settles once. Somewhere near the roof, a tiny creak that comes and goes, and if you listen very carefully, you can hear the faint, high-pitched fizz of the vinegar working on the bronze, a sound so delicate it might be imagined. The scents have blended into a single peaceful presence, vinegar and rue and rosemary, with the old wood of the table, and the faint, far-off earthiness of the clay walls. You close your eyes for a moment and simply breathe, and when you open them again, the scene is unchanged, the jar still standing, the instrument still resting, the flame still burning. The soaking will take as long as it takes, and you are in no hurry to move on. The night is deep and dark outside, and the high window shows only blackness, but inside the small circle of lamplight there is only this: the tall clay jar, the submerged bronze, the drifting herbs, and the steady, peaceful quiet of a task done slowly. You let your hands rest in your lap, palms up and open, and you allow yourself to simply exist in this moment, watching the tiny particles drift and settle, waiting for the vinegar to do its gentle work. The tall clay jar has stood on the table for a long, quiet while, its contents undisturbed except for the slow, aimless drift of a few remaining roux particles that have not yet found their way to the bottom. The vinegar, now faintly tinted with the greenish brown of the herbs, holds the instruments in a motionless embrace, and the lamp continues to cast its steady golden light across the scene. You have been sitting still, letting the soak do its work, and now you feel a gentle inclination to move forward, to lift the tools from their bath and begin the next quiet stage. There is no urgency, only a soft, natural readiness that has arrived on its own. You lean forward and place your hands on either side of the tall jar, feeling the cool, slightly rough texture of the unglazed clay under your palms. The jar is not cold, but it is cooler than the air, and the contrast is pleasant. You slide it a little closer to the center of the work area, making sure it sits on a stable, flat section of the cloth, and then you reach for a fresh piece of linen that you keep folded near the edge of the table. This cloth is different from the one on which the instruments first rested. It is smaller, about the size of a hand towel, and it is woven from a finer thread, giving it a smoother, closer texture. The color is a pale cream, and the edges are hemmed with tiny, even stitches that you made yourself on a long winter evening. You unfold it and spread it flat on the table, smoothing out the creases with the side of your hand, and then you are ready. The first instrument to leave the jar is the larger scalpel. You reach into the vinegar with your thumb and forefinger, the liquid cool and faintly tacky against your skin, and you take hold of the handle just below the blade. The bronze feels slippery from the soak, and you lift it slowly, letting the excess vinegar drain back into the jar in a series of small amber drops that fall with a light, rapid pattering. The scalpel emerges glistening, its surface darkened by the liquid, and you hold it over the jar for a moment longer, turning it slightly so that the vinegar runs off the tip and down the curved edge, each drop catching the lamplight before it falls. Then you transfer the scalpel to the fresh linen cloth, laying it down gently, and the wet bronze leaves a faint damp imprint on the fabric. You repeat the action with the smaller scalpel, reaching into the vinegar and drawing it out with the same patient care. The curved blade holds a little pool of liquid in its belly, and you tilt it to let the pool run off, watching the thin stream pour back into the jar. The smaller scalpel joins its larger companion on the cloth, and then you lift the slender probe, which has been standing upright with its blunt tip above the surface. The vinegar sheets off the smooth shaft in a single uninterrupted curtain, and the olive tip emerges last, trailing a thin line of droplets. You place the probe on the cloth, and it rolls slightly before coming to rest. The blunt forceps come out next, and you open and close them once above the jar to release the vinegar trap between the arms, the liquid falling in a brief silver shower. Then the sharp hook, its curved point holding a single trembling drop that hangs for a long moment before releasing. The heavy bone lever requires both hands again, and you lift it out carefully, feeling the weight of it increase as the vinegar drips away, until it is once again the solid, dense object you know so well. Finally, the fine-toothed comb, which you lift with extra care, tilting it so that the vinegar runs out from between the teeth in a dozen tiny parallel streams that glitter in the lamplight. All the instruments now rest on the fresh linen cloth, wet and dark and shining, and the jar of vinegar sits off to the side, its work done. You take the jar and carry it to the waste vessel near the door, pouring the used vinegar carefully into the larger container. The liquid swirls as it leaves the jar, the spent herbs swirling with it in a dark, cloudy suspension, and then the jar is empty. You set it aside to be washed later and return to the table, where the instruments wait for you in a neat, damp row. The smell of vinegar still lingers in the air, but it is softer now, tempered by the clean scent of the linen and the steady, warm presence of the lamp. Now you reach for the soft wool cloth that you keep exclusively for drying. This cloth is one of your favorites, a square of undyed, cream-colored wool that has been washed so many times it has become almost impossibly soft, its fibers loosened and fluffy, like the belly fur of a lamb. The edges are slightly felted from handling, and it has no hem, only a natural blurred border where the weave gradually gives way to a fine, fuzzy fringe. You lift it to your face for a moment, feeling its gentle warmth against your cheek, and then you lay it across your left palm, where it will serve as a cushion and a drying surface all at once. You pick up the larger scalpel with your right hand, holding it by the handle, and you place the blade flat on the wool cloth in your left palm. The wool instantly begins to draw the moisture from the bronze, darkening in patches where it touches the wet metal. You fold the cloth over the blade with your right hand, covering it completely, and then you begin to wipe. The motion is slow and methodical. You start at the base of the blade, where it meets the handle, and you draw the cloth downward toward the tip in a single smooth stroke, pressing just firmly enough to absorb the vinegar and any last traces of the roux sediment. The wool slides easily over the bronze, and when you lift it, the metal beneath is noticeably drier, its surface still slightly hazy but no longer dripping. You turn the scalpel over and repeat the stroke on the other side, the cloth now damp and cool against your fingers. Then you wipe the cutting edge itself, using the very tip of the cloth folded into a small soft pad, and you draw it along the edge from base to point with a feather-light touch, feeling the faint, regular texture of the honed metal. The handle receives its own attention. You wrap the cloth around it and twist gently, polishing the rounded end and the slight swelling in the middle until the bronze begins to glow with a soft, satiny sheen. When you are satisfied, you set the larger scalpel on a dry section of the linen cloth, and it lies there, warm and clean, its surface free of any moisture. The smaller scalpel is next, and the process is much the same, though the curved blade requires a slightly different motion. You cup the blade in the wool cloth and rotate it slowly, letting the fabric follow the curve, wiping the belly and the point with a gentle circular movement. The bronze dries to a slightly lighter shade than the larger scalpel, a pale honey color that catches the lamplight and holds it in a soft, diffuse glow. You check the blade carefully, holding it up to the light and turning it from side to side, and you see no water spots, no streaks, no trace of the vinegar. The metal is clean and dry, ready for the next step, and you place it beside the larger scalpel, the two blades now parallel and gleaming. The slender probe is a pleasure to dry. Its smooth, satiny surface glides through the wool cloth as you pull it from end to end, and you use a light pinching motion to wipe the shaft, your thumb and forefinger wrapped in the cloth, moving from the blunt tip to the olive tip in one continuous, unhurried pass. You then switch ends and repeat the motion, and the probe emerges with a soft, even luster, its entire length glowing like a strand of pale gold. The olive tip receives a final, gentle buffing, cupped in the wool and turned in small circles, and then the probe is laid on the cloth beside the scalpels. The blunt forceps require more attention to the joints and the gripping surfaces. You wipe each arm separately, drawing the cloth along the length of the bronze, and then you open the forceps wide and fold the cloth into a thin edge, working it gently into the hinge area where the two arms meet. The cross-hatched teeth on the gripping ends are wiped with a soft, dabbing motion, the wool pressing into each tiny groove and lifting away any hidden moisture. The forceps spring open and closed easily, their movement smooth and silent, and when you set them down, they lie in their customary relaxed pose, the arms slightly apart. The sharp hook is wiped with a careful, delicate touch, its curved point wrapped in the very tip of the wool cloth and drawn through with a slow, twisting motion. The bronze dries to a dark, smoky shade, and the tiny crescent of the hook catches the light and holds it like a sliver of captured moon. You place it on the cloth with its curve facing away from you, and it sits there quietly, a small, unassuming shape. The bone lever, because of its size, requires you to set down the wool cloth and use both hands. You pick up a larger drying cloth, a piece of old, soft linen that you keep for this purpose, and you fold it into a thick pad. You hold the lever by its egg-shaped handle and wipe the broad, flat end with long, sweeping strokes, covering the wide surface in a series of overlapping passes. The dark patina on the lever seems to deepen as it dries, becoming almost velvety, and the weight of the instrument makes every movement feel deliberate and grounded. You turn it over and wipe the other side, then the edges, and finally the handle itself, which you buff with the cloth wrapped around your palm. The lever, now dry and warm, is placed on the cloth at the top of the arrangement, its presence solid and reassuring. The fine-toothed comb is the last to be dried, and you take up the soft wool cloth again, folding it into a small, neat square. You support the comb in your left hand and dab gently along the row of teeth with the cloth, pressing the wool into each tiny gap and then lifting it away. The motion is repetitive and soothing, a soft, regular tapping that barely disturbs the air. You then wipe the smooth back of the comb, drawing the cloth along its arched length, and the bronze dries to a pale, almost silvery sheen. The teeth are clean and dry, each one distinct and perfect, and the comb is laid at the end of the row, completing the set. All the instruments now rest on the linen cloth, dry and gleaming in the lamplight. You take a moment to look at them, your eyes moving slowly from the larger scalpel to the smaller, along the slender probe, across the open forceps, past the sharp hook and the heavy lever, to the fine-toothed comb. Each piece is clean, each surface free of moisture, each edge and curve glowing with a soft, warm radiance. The wool cloth in your hand is damp and cool, and you set it aside to dry, spreading it over the edge of the table, where it will be ready for the next task. You let your hands rest in your lap, palms up, and you take a slow, deep breath. The smell of vinegar has faded almost entirely, replaced by the clean, neutral scent of dry linen and the faint, pleasant odor of warm bronze. The lamp continues its quiet vigil, the flame steady and tall, and the room around you is utterly still. The night outside the high window is deep and dark, but inside the circle of lamplight there is only this: a row of clean, dry instruments, a peaceful work table, and the slow, steady rhythm of your own calm breathing. The instruments lie on the linen cloth in a quiet, orderly row, their bronze surfaces now dry and faintly warm from the attention you have given them. The lamp burns steadily, and the room is so still that the tiny hiss of the wick seems like the only sound in the world. You look at the tools one by one, noting the way the light falls on each blade and handle, and you see that while they are clean, they are not yet bright. There is a soft, muted look to the metal, a slight haziness left by the vinegar and the water, and you know that the next step will gently lift this haze away. You reach for the small clay pot that holds your fine abrasive powder, the pot that sits on the shelf among the jars of herbs, always ready for an evening such as this. The pot is small enough to fit in the palm of your hand, a squat, rounded vessel made from the same pale terracotta as the basin, but without any glaze. Its surface is matte and slightly gritty, like a piece of sun-dried earth, and it has a narrow neck that widens just enough to allow 2 fingers to reach inside. The stopper is a simple plug of cork, darkened with age and pressed firmly into the opening, and you take hold of it with your thumb and forefinger, twisting it gently until it comes free with a soft, dry pop. You set the cork aside on the table, where it rolls a tiny distance and then stops against the folded wool cloth. You peer into the pot, though you already know exactly what you will see. The powder inside is a pale greyish white, the colour of fine ash or ground seashells, and it has a soft, flowery texture that shifts very slightly when you tilt the pot. The smell that rises from it is neutral and clean, like dry stone and old dust, with the faintest trace of something chalky and mineral. You dip your thumb and forefinger into the neck, feeling the cool, silky powder slide around your skin, and you bring out a small pinch. You hold the pinch up to the lamplight and roll it between your fingertips, feeling the fine, even grit. It is not harsh, not sharp. It is a gentle abrasive, smooth enough to polish without scratching, and the tiny particles catch the light in a million minuscule sparkles before falling back into the pot. You set the pot down and reach for the piece of soft leather that you keep for this very purpose. The leather is a small, irregular scrap, about the size of your outstretched hand, cut from the same dark hide as the instrument roll. One side is smooth and slightly shiny from use, while the other is rough and suede-like, and you have always used the rough side for polishing because it holds the powder so well. The leather is dry at the moment, and you take a small dish of clean water, the same water you used for the first rinse, and dip your fingers into it, then flick a few drops onto the rough side of the leather. The drops bead up for a moment before soaking in, darkening the surface into a rich, deep brown. You spread the moisture evenly with your fingertip, rubbing it in small circles until the leather feels cool and damp but not wet. Now you pour the powder. You tip the clay pot over the dampened leather and let a small mound of the pale grey dust fall onto the surface. It lands with a soft, almost silent puff, and you watch as it begins to absorb the moisture at the edges, darkening slightly where it touches the damp hide. You set the pot aside and use your fingertip to spread the powder into a thin, even layer, mixing it gently with the residual moisture until it forms a smooth greyish paste. The texture is like very fine, damp sand, just gritty enough to feel against your skin, but not so gritty that it would scratch. You lift your finger and inspect the paste, then nod to yourself and turn your attention to the instruments. The larger scalpel is first. You pick it up by the handle and hold it firmly, but without tension, your thumb resting along the flat of the blade. You position the leather in your left palm, the paste side facing up, and then you lower the blade onto it, pressing the bronze gently into the paste. The contact makes a very faint sandy sound, a soft dry hiss that is barely audible over the whisper of the lamp. You begin to polish. The motion is slow and circular, a series of small overlapping loops that you trace with the blade against the leather. You start at the base of the blade, just above the handle, and you work your way outward toward the belly, moving the scalpel in a steady hypnotic rhythm. The paste slides between the bronze and the leather, its fine particles gently abrading the surface of the metal, lifting away the faint haze and the microscopic water spots. The sound is constant and soothing, a low, sandy murmur that rises and falls with each circle. You watch the metal as you polish, and you see it begin to change. The soft, muted color of the dried bronze slowly gives way to a clearer, brighter gleam, a pale gold that seems to glow from within. The paste darkens as it picks up the tiny particles of oxidized metal, turning from grey to a dull, muddy color. You turn the scalpel over and polish the other side, repeating the same circular motion, the blade moving over the leather with the same steady, even pressure. You work your way from the base to the tip and back again, covering every part of the flat surface. Then you shift your grip and polish the cutting edge itself, holding the scalpel at a slight angle so that the very edge barely grazes the paste, the touch as light as a feather. The sound changes here, becoming a finer, higher whisper, and you move with extra care, knowing that the edge is already sharp and needs only a gentle touch. When the edge gleams with a thin, bright line, you wipe the blade on a clean corner of the leather to remove the excess paste, and then you hold the scalpel up to the lamplight. The difference is subtle but unmistakable. The bronze is no longer hazy. It shines with a soft, satiny luster, the light gliding across the surface in a smooth, unbroken sheet. The blade looks alive, its curves and planes defined by the gentle contrast between the bright highlights and the deeper, shadowed areas. You turn it slowly, watching the light move, and then you set it down on a fresh section of the linen cloth where it rests with a quiet, satisfied presence. The smaller scalpel is next, and you take it up with the same calm, unhurried motion. You add a little more powder to the leather, just a pinch, and you mix it into the remaining paste with your fingertip, refreshing the grit. The curved blade of the smaller scalpel requires a slightly different approach. You cannot polish it with the same flat, circular strokes, so you adapt your motion to follow the curve. You start at the base, where the blade meets the handle, and you polish in small overlapping arcs that trace the belly of the blade, moving from the inner curve to the outer edge and back again. The sound is softer here because the curved surface makes less contact with the leather at any one time, and you work slowly, letting the paste do its quiet work. The bronze begins to brighten just as the larger scalpel did, the haze lifting from the metal like a thin veil being drawn aside. You watch the highlight emerge along the curve, a pale luminous ribbon that follows the shape of the blade, and you polish until the entire surface is evenly bright. You then turn the blade over and polish the reverse side, using the same gentle arcing strokes. And when you are finished, you wipe the scalpel clean and hold it up to the light. The smaller scalpel now matches its larger companion, its bronze gleaming with the same soft, warm glow, and you place it beside the other on the linen cloth. The slender probe is a different challenge, because its shape is long and round rather than flat. You refresh the paste on the leather once more, adding a drop of water to keep it from drying out, and then you take the probe in your right hand. Instead of laying it flat on the leather, you grip the shaft near the middle and roll it between your fingers while pressing it gently into the paste. The motion is like rolling a small stick between your palms, a continuous back and forth rotation that polishes the entire circumference of the shaft. The sound is a soft, rhythmic shushing, and the probe turns smoothly under your fingers, the bronze slowly brightening from the blunt tip to the olive tip. You move your grip along the shaft, polishing section by section, until every part of the probe has passed through the paste. The olive tip receives a few extra moments of attention, cupped in the leather and rotated in small circles, and when you lift the probe to the light, it shines with a uniform, satiny sheen from end to end. The blunt forceps come next, and you separate the two arms slightly so that you can polish each one individually. You lay one arm flat on the leather and polish it with small circular strokes, just as you did with the scalpels, working from the hinge area down to the broad, flat gripping end. The cross-hatched teeth require a delicate touch. You press the leather gently into them with your fingertip, working the paste into the tiny grooves with a soft dabbing motion. The sound is a faint, gritty tap-tap-tap, and you repeat the process on the second arm, then on the hinge itself, polishing the curved bronze where the two arms meet. The forceps begin to glow with a renewed brightness, and when you set them down they lie open and gleaming on the cloth. The sharp hook is the smallest instrument, and its curved point requires the most careful handling. You hold it by the handle and polish the straight shaft first, using the same rolling motion you used for the probe, and then you turn your attention to the curved neck and the tiny, sharp point. You fold the leather into a small soft cone and use the tip of the cone to polish the inside of the curve, moving in gentle sweeping strokes that follow the shape of the hook. The paste darkens as it picks up the faintest trace of oxidation from the point, and when you wipe the hook clean, the bronze shines with a dark, almost mirror-like gleam. You place it on the cloth, its curve facing away from you, and it sits there like a small polished question mark. The bone lever, being so large and heavy, requires you to use both hands and a fresh section of the leather. You spread a generous amount of paste on the leather, enough to cover the broad, flat end, and then you hold the lever by its egg-shaped handle and press the flat end into the paste. You polish with long, sweeping strokes, moving the lever back and forth in a straight line, the weight of the bronze providing the pressure so that your arms do not have to. The sound is deeper than before, a low, steady rasp that fills the quiet room, and you watch the dark patina on the metal begin to lighten slightly, the surface becoming smoother and more reflective. You turn the lever over and polish the other side, then the edges, and finally the handle itself, which you buff with a small amount of fresh paste on your fingertip. The lever emerges from the polishing with a deep, rich glow, its surface like dark honey, and you set it back on the cloth with a feeling of quiet satisfaction. The fine-toothed comb is the last to be polished, and it requires the most patience. You take a fresh corner of the leather, add a tiny pinch of powder, and mix it with a drop of water to form a thin, fine paste. You hold the comb in your left hand, supporting its entire length, and you use your right index finger, wrapped in the leather, to polish each individual tooth. The motion is a gentle back and forth stroke, so light that you barely feel the teeth through the leather, and you work your way from one end of the comb to the other, polishing each tooth in turn. The sound is a very faint, high-pitched whisper, like the rustle of fine sand, and it is so quiet that you find yourself leaning closer to hear it. When all the teeth are polished, you wipe the smooth back of the comb with a broad sweeping stroke, and then you hold the comb up to the light. The teeth gleam like tiny polished needles, and the back shines with a soft, even luster. All the instruments now lie on the linen cloth, their bronze surfaces transformed. The haze is gone, replaced by a clear, gentle brightness that catches the lamplight and holds it in a warm golden glow. You look at the row of tools and you see your own reflection in each one, not a detailed image, but a soft, blurred shape, a suggestion of your face and hands and the lamp behind you. The leather in your palm is dark with used paste, the powder reduced to a thin grey sludge that has done its work well, and you set the leather aside on the edge of the table, where it will dry and be ready for another evening. You sit back on your stool and let your hands rest in your lap, palms up and relaxed. The room is quiet and still, the lamp burning as steadily as ever, and the night outside the high window is deep and dark. The smell of the powder clean, mineral, and faintly chalky lingers in the air, mixing with the warm scent of the lamp oil and the older, fainter trace of herbs. You take a slow, deep breath, and you feel the quiet, rhythmic calm that comes from a task done slowly and well. The instruments are bright now, their surfaces smooth and clean, and you are ready for whatever comes next, though you are in no hurry to move on. The polishing leather lies to one side of the table, its surface darkened with a thin layer of spent paste that has turned from pale grey to a soft, muddy colour. The instruments, arranged in a neat row on the linen cloth, are bright and gleaming, but they are not yet finished. A fine, almost invisible film of damp powder still clings to the bronze, a residue left by the abrasive that must now be rinsed away. You look at the tools and see that their gleam is slightly muted, as though they are looking at you through a breath-fogged mirror, and you know that the next rinse will clear that last veil. The basin sits empty near the edge of the table, its greenish glaze still showing faint water spots from the earlier rinse, and you reach for it with both hands, drawing it toward the center of the work area. You rise from the stool and walk to the door, the movement slow and unhurried, and you step out into the cool night air of the porch. The pitcher that holds your fresh water stands where you left it, still nearly full, and you lift it with one hand on the handle and the other supporting its base. The clay is cool against your palms, and the water inside makes a soft, sloshing sound as you carry it back inside. You close the door behind you, returning to the warm circle of lamplight, and you set the pitcher on the table beside the basin. A lamp flame flickers once at the movement of air, then steadies again, and you sit down on the stool, drawing the pitcher closer. Pouring the water is a slow, deliberate act. You tilt the pitcher over the basin, and the clear stream arcs downward, striking the glazed surface with a gentle, musical splash. The sound is different this time, slightly higher and sharper because the basin is dry and the water meets hard clay rather than a pool. It spreads quickly, covering the bottom in a wide, shallow sheet, and you watch the level rise, the water catching the lamplight and throwing a trembling golden reflection onto the ceiling. Small air bubbles form where the stream enters, bracing across the surface and then vanishing, and you pour until the basin is 2/3 full, just as before. The water is cool and clear, with that same clean, faintly sweet smell of deep well water, and you set the pitcher down, leaving it near at hand. Now you turn to the instruments. The larger scalpel is first, and you pick it up by the handle, feeling the slight grittiness of the dried paste in your fingertips. You lower it into the water, blade first, and the surface parts with a soft, liquid sigh. The paste begins to dissolve at once, releasing tiny, cloudy wisps that drift away from the bronze-like pale smoke underwater. You hold the scalpel submerged and rotate it slowly, watching the powder lift off in fine swirling threads, and you use the pad of your thumb to rub gently along the flat of the blade, feeling the faint, silky slip of the dissolved paste. The water around the scalpel turns slightly cloudy, a pale grey haze that spreads in slow drifting tendrils, and you move the blade through the water, letting the gentle currents carry the residue away. You lift the scalpel out and inspect it, holding it up to the lamplight. The bronze is wet and dark, and there are still faint streaks of paste near the handle, so you lower it back into the water and give it a second gentle rub, this time focusing on the joint where blade meets handle. Your thumb works in small circles, and the last of the powder dissolves and drifts away, leaving the metal perfectly clean under the water. You lift the scalpel again, let the excess water drip back into the basin in a quick succession of round, heavy drops, and then you place it on a dry section of the linen cloth, where it leaves a dark, wet imprint. The smaller scalpel follows, and you rinse it with the same patient thoroughness, dipping it into the cloudy water and turning it slowly. The curved blade releases its film of paste in a faint, milky swirl, and you rub the belly and the tip with your thumb, feeling the smooth metal emerge from beneath the powder. The water in the basin is now noticeably clouded, a pale, opaque grey that softens the green glaze beneath it, and the lamplight no longer penetrates to the bottom, but instead scatters into a diffuse, silvery glow. You lift the smaller scalpel, let it drip, and set it beside its larger companion, the two blades now wet and dark on the cloth. The slender probe is next, and you lower it into the basin, holding it by the middle and rotating it between your fingers under water. The paste lifts off in a thin, spiraling ribbon that unwinds from the shaft and disperses into the cloudy water. You rub the length of the probe with your thumb and forefinger, a gentle, pinching motion that travels from the blunt tip to the olive tip and back again, and the metal becomes slick and clean under your touch. The olive tip receives a few extra moments of attention, rubbed in small circles until no trace of powder remains in the tiny groove where the tip meets the shaft. You lift the probe, water streaming from its ends, and you lay it on the cloth above the scalpels. The blunt forceps require a bit more attention because the paste has worked its way into the cross-hatched teeth and the hinge. You dip the forceps into the water and open and close them several times, watching the cloudy wisps puff out from between the arms. You use your thumb to rub along the teeth, pressing gently to dislodge the paste from each tiny groove, and the water carries it away in a series of small, billowing clouds. You work the hinge area with a delicate touch, opening and closing the forceps underwater, and the motion causes a faint, rhythmic clicking that is softened and muted by the liquid. When the forceps are clean, you lift them out, let the water drain from between the arms, and place them on the cloth with the arms slightly apart. The sharp hook slips into the water with barely a ripple, and you rotate it slowly, rubbing the curved point and the slender neck with the softest touch. The paste, which had gathered in the tiny curve of the hook, dissolves in a single thin thread that spirals upward and then vanishes, and you hold the hook up to the light to check that no residue remains. The bronze is wet and dark, and the point holds a single trembling drop of water that falls as you watch. You set the hook on the cloth, its curve facing away from you, and it rests there quietly. The heavy bone lever goes into the basin with both hands, and its weight causes the cloudy water to rise slightly, lapping at the rim. You hold the lever submerged and rub the broad flat end with your whole palm, moving in slow sweeping circles that cover the entire surface. The paste comes off in a grey, cloudy film that spreads through the water, and you turn the lever over to repeat the process on the other side, feeling the metal become slick and smooth under your fingers. The egg-shaped handle is easier to clean. You simply rotate it in the water, rubbing it with your palm until no trace of powder remains. You lift the lever out, water cascading from its surface in a dozen rivulets, and you set it on the cloth where its weight presses the damp linen flat. The fine-toothed comb is last, and you lower it into the basin with extra care, supporting its full length. The paste has settled between the teeth, and you use the pad of your thumb to stroke along the row of teeth, moving from base to tip in a single continuous motion. The water around the comb becomes faintly cloudy as the powder dissolves, and you repeat the motion several times, each stroke a little gentler than the last, until the water runs clear between the teeth. You lift the comb out, and it drips from a dozen tiny points, each tooth holding a minuscule droplet that catches the light before falling. You lay the comb on the cloth at the end of the row, and all the instruments now rest wet and clean on the linen. The basin of water is distinctly cloudy, a pale milky grey that obscures the green glaze beneath. You lift it carefully, both hands on the rim, and carry it to the waste jar near the door. The walk is only a few steps, and the water sloshes very gently, making a soft slapping sound against the terracotta sides. You pour the used water into the waste jar, watching it stream from the basin in a smooth grey arc that splashes into the larger vessel with a deep, hollow sound. The last of the water drains out, leaving a thin grey residue on the bottom of the basin, and you return to the table to set the empty basin down. Now you pour fresh water from the pitcher, refilling the basin for the final rinse. The clean water is crystal clear, and it splashes into the basin with a bright, happy sound. the sound of a small stream over clean stones. You fill it to the same level as before, and the lamplight shines through the water, casting a clear, trembling circle of gold on the tabletop beneath. The basin is once again a pool of light, and you set the pitcher aside, its contents now reduced by half but still ample for the task ahead. You begin the final rinse, taking each instrument in turn and dipping it into the clean water. The larger scalpel goes first, and the fresh water washes away any last invisible trace of the cloudy rinse, leaving the bronze perfectly wet and gleaming. You turn it slowly, watching the water sheet over the blade, and when you lift it out, no powder, no film, no streak remains. The metal is simply wet, a dark shining surface that reflects the lamp in a single, steady point of light. You place it on a new dry section of the cloth, and it leaves a clean, damp outline with no hint of grey. The smaller scalpel follows. Then the slender probe, the blunt forceps, the sharp hook, the bone laver, and the fine-toothed comb. Each one enters the clean water, receives a gentle swirl, and emerges free of any residue. The basin water remains clear throughout, because the instruments are already clean, and the final rinse is more of a ceremonial act than a practical one, a last gentle bath that leaves the bronze ready for drying. You work your way through the row without haste, and when the last instrument, the comb, is lifted and laid on the cloth, you look at the basin and see that the water is still as clear as when you poured it, a small, quiet victory. You take the basin to the waste jar and pour out this water as well, though it is clean enough to keep. You pour it simply to empty the basin, and the clear stream joins the grey water in the jar with a soft, gurgling sound. You set the empty basin on the shelf where it belongs, its green glaze now clean and dry, and you return to the table, wiping your hands on a dry corner of the cloth. Now comes the second drying, the final drying, the one that will leave the instruments not merely dry but perfectly, flawlessly dry, with no water spots and no streaks. You reach for the fresh linen cloth that you have kept folded near the edge of the table, a cloth you have not used yet tonight, and you shake it out with a single, soft snap. The cloth is made of fine, tightly woven linen, bleached to a pale cream by many washings in the sun, and it is so soft that it drapes over your hand like a veil. You fold it into a neat square and place it in your left palm. Then you pick up the larger scalpel with your right hand. The drying begins. You press the linen gently against the flat of the blade, absorbing the water with a soft, blotting motion. You do not rub yet. You simply let the cloth drink the moisture, and you watch the linen darken where it touches the wet bronze. Then you begin to wipe, drawing the cloth from the base of the blade to the tip in a single smooth stroke, using just enough pressure to lift the water without leaving any lint behind. The bronze emerges from the cloth with a soft, satiny gleam, its surface perfectly dry and free of any mark. You turn the scalpel over and repeat the stroke on the other side. Then you wipe the handle, twisting the cloth around the rounded end and buffing it gently. You hold the scalpel up to the lamp, turning it this way and that, and you see no water spots, no streaks, no smudges. The metal is as smooth and clean as a polished pebble from a cool stream, and the light glides across it in a single, unbroken sheet. You set the scalpel down on the dry linen, and it rests there with a quiet, satisfied presence. The smaller scalpel is dried in the same way, and the curved blade requires you to follow its shape with the cloth, cupping the linen around the belly and wiping in a gentle, sweeping arc. The bronze dries to a pale honey gold color, that seems to glow softly in the lamplight, and you check the blade from every angle, finding nothing but smooth, clean metal. You place it beside the larger scalpel, and the two blades now lie parallel, their surfaces gleaming. The slender probe is dried with a light, pinching motion, the cloth wrapped around the shaft and drawn from end to end in one continuous pass. You switch ends and repeat, and the probe emerges with a uniform satiny luster, its olive tit catching the light and holding it in a small bright bead. The blunt forceps require you to dry each arm separately, wiping along the length and then dabbing gently into the hinge and the teeth with the corner of the cloth, and when you set them down, they lie open and clean, the cross-hatched teeth free of any moisture. The sharp hook is dried with extra care, the cloth folded into a tiny point to reach into the curve, and the bronze dries to a dark, smoky shade that makes the hook look almost soft. The bone lever is dried with both hands, the large linen cloth folded into a thick pad and drawn across the broad flat end in long sweeping strokes, and the handle is buffed with a circular motion that leaves it warm and glowing. The fine-toothed comb is dried last, and you use the very tip of the cloth, folded into a small precise point, to dab between each tooth, absorbing the last tiny droplets of water until every tooth is dry and bright. All the instruments now lie on the linen cloth, completely dry and perfectly clean. You hold each one up to the lamp in turn, turning it slowly and watching the light play over the bronze. The larger scalpel gleams with a warm golden light. The smaller scalpel shines with a slightly paler, more delicate luster. The slender probe is a rod of soft, even radiance. The blunt forceps sparkle at their tips. The sharp hook holds a tiny crescent of reflected flame. The bone lever glows with a deep, rich patina, and the fine-toothed comb winks from 100 tiny points. There are no water spots, no residue of any kind. The metal is smooth and warm and perfect, like stones that have been tumbled in a river for 1,000 years. You sit back on your stool and let your hands rest in your lap. The room is quiet and still, the lamp burning steadily, and the night outside the high window is deep and dark. The linen cloth beneath the instruments is dry and smooth, and the tools themselves are arranged in an orderly row that pleases you without your needing to say so. You feel a quiet sense of something very like contentment, though the feeling is so mild and so ordinary that it barely rises above the surface of your awareness. It is simply the satisfaction of a task done slowly and well, a small, private harmony that asks for no audience. You take a slow breath and let your gaze wander over the instruments, the cloth, the lamp, the shelf of jars, the dark window, and then back to the instruments. They are ready now for the next step, the oiling that will protect them and deepen their glow. But you are in no hurry. The night is long and calm, and there is time enough for everything. You fold the damp linen cloth and set it aside. Then you pick up the dry cloth and spread it fresh on the table, smoothing out the creases with your palm. The instruments wait, bright and clean and dry, and the lamp burns on, its flame a steady, golden presence in the quiet room. The instruments lie on the fresh linen cloth, their bronze surfaces dry and clean, and already glowing with a soft, pale luster from the polishing and the final rinse. The lamp burns steadily above them, and its flame is reflected in each blade and handle as a tiny, motionless point of gold. The room is quiet and warm, and the smell of clean metal and dry linen has replaced the earlier scents of vinegar and abrasive powder. You look at the row of tools, the two scalpels, the slender probe, the blunt forceps, the sharp hook, the heavy bone lever, and the fine-toothed comb. And you know that one more step remains before they can be wrapped and put away for the night. They need a thin, protective layer of oil to keep the bronze from tarnishing in the days ahead, and this oiling is perhaps the most peaceful part of the whole routine, a slow, gentle anointing that you have always found restful. You rise from your stool, your tunic brushing softly against your legs, and you walk to the shelf where the small glass flask of olive oil waits. The flask is a simple, elegant shape, no larger than a pear, with a narrow neck and a small flared lip that makes pouring easy. The glass is not perfectly clear. It has a faint greenish-bluish tint, like the color of a shallow sea seen through morning mist, and tiny air bubbles are trapped in its walls, frozen there by the glassmaker's breath long ago. The oil inside is a deep golden yellow, the color of late summer sunshine, and it moves slowly when you tilt the flask, thick and smooth and heavy. You take the flask down with both hands, feeling its cool, solid weight, and you carry it back to the table, setting it beside the instruments. Next you take a shallow dish from the shelf, a small unglazed terracotta saucer that is reserved for this purpose alone. It is wide and flat, with a slightly raised rim, and its surface is stained dark from years of absorbing olive oil. The terracotta now a rich, warm brown that glistens faintly in the lamplight. You place the dish on the table, positioning it so that it sits within easy reach, and then you lift the glass flask and remove the small cork stopper. The cork comes out with a soft, slight pop, and at once the scent of olive oil rises into the air, a clean, fruity smell, with a hint of green grass and a faint, peppery warmth at the end. It is the same oil you use for cooking and for anointing skin, pressed from the olives that grow on the gnarled trees in the valley below the town, and its fragrance is as familiar to you as the smell of fresh bread. You tilt the flask over the shallow dish and begin to pour. The oil emerges in a slow, thick stream, not like water or vinegar, but heavy and languid, a ribbon of liquid gold that coils slightly as it falls. It lands in the center of the dish with a soft, deep sound, more of a glug than a splash, and it spreads outward in a smooth, even circle, its surface catching the lamplight and holding it in a pool of trembling brilliance. You pour until the dish holds a thin, even layer of oil, no deeper than the thickness of your smallest finger, and then you straighten the flask and let the last drop fall, watching it stretch into a long, thin thread before it releases and lands with a tiny, silent ripple. You set the flask aside, cork it loosely, and the scent of olive oil now fills the room, blending with the dry, clean smell of the instruments and the faint, warm breath of the lamp. Now you take up the piece of wool that you will use to apply the oil. It is an old, frayed scrap of undyed wool cloth, torn from a larger piece long ago, and its edges are soft and fuzzy where the weave has unraveled. The wool is a pale, creamy brown, the natural color of the sheep, and it has been used so many times for oiling that it is permanently saturated with a faint, golden residue, making it feel slightly heavier than it would otherwise. You hold it in your palm and fold it into a small, neat pad, about the size of a walnut, and then you dip it into the oil. The wool drinks the oil greedily, darkening it once to a deep amber, and you lift it out and let the excess drip back into the dish. The drips fall slowly, thick and heavy, and they land with a soft, liquid patter that is almost musical. You press the pad gently between your fingers, and the oil wells up around your skin, warm and slick and smooth. You reach for the larger scalpel, picking it up by the handle with your left hand, and you bring the oiled wool to the blade with your right. The wool touches the bronze at the base, just above the handle, and you begin to spread the oil in a slow, even stroke that follows the flat of the blade from base to tip. The oil glides over the metal like a thin, golden skin, and the bronze darkens instantly, its pale, polished gleam deepening into a warm, honeyed glow that seems to pull the lamplight inward and hold it there. The scent of olive oil rises more strongly now, carried on the warmth of your hand and the friction of the wool, and you watch the oil spread and settle, filling the microscopic pores of the metal and sealing it against the air. You stroke the blade again, a second pass, this time with a little more pressure, and the wool leaves a fine, even film that smooths out any last trace of dryness, until the entire surface shines with a deep liquid luster. You turn the scalpel over and oil the other side, repeating the slow sweeping motion, and then you attend to the cutting edge itself. You fold the wool into a thinner, more precise edge and draw it along the blade's curve, the oil pooling in the tiny honed line and then spreading outward. The edge gleams with a sharp silver light inside the golden glow, and you run the wool along it one more time, so lightly that you barely feel the contact, just to be certain the film is even. The handle receives its own share of attention. You wrap the oiled wool around it and twist gently, working the oil into the rounded end and the slight swelling in the middle, and the bronze handle darkens to a rich, warm brown that is smooth and pleasant to the touch. You set the larger scalpel back on the linen cloth, and it rests there with a new, deeper radiance, its surface seeming almost to breathe. The smaller scalpel is next, and you refresh the wool with another dip into the dish, letting it absorb a fresh measure of oil. The curved blade requires a slightly different motion. You cup the wool around the belly and rotate it in a slow circular path, following the curve from the base to the point and back again. The oil sinks into the metal, and the blade changes before your eyes, its color deepening from a pale, sandy gold to a richer, more lustrous shade, like the color of a ripe apricot in the sun. You oil the inner curve with a gentle dabbing motion, the wool pressed into the hollow and moved in tiny overlapping arcs, and then you oil the outer edge, drawing the wool along its length in a smooth, continuous glide. The handle is oiled with a few quick twists, and then you set the smaller scalpel beside the larger one, the two blades now gleaming in harmony, their colors slightly different, but both warm and glowing. The slender probe is a pleasure to oil because its smooth, satiny surface takes the oil so evenly. You dip the wool into the dish and then grip the probe in the middle, rotating it between your fingers while pressing the oiled wool against the shaft. The motion is like rolling a thin stick between your palms, a gentle, rhythmic back and forth that coats the entire length in one continuous action. The oil spreads in a thin, glassy layer, and the bronze darkens to a deep, smoky gold, the color of late afternoon light on old stone. You work your way from the blunt tip to the olive tip, and then you give the olive tip an extra dab of oil, rubbing it in small circles, until it shines with a soft, rounded glow that catches the lamplight and holds it like a tiny captured sun. The probe is laid back on the cloth, and it lies there, a slender rod of quiet light. The blunt forceps require you to separate the two arms slightly so that you can oil each one individually. You lay one arm flat on your palm and stroke the oiled wool along its length, from the hinge to the broad, flat gripping end, and the bronze drinks the oil and darkens to a deep, burnished brown. The cross-hatched teeth on the gripping surface need a delicate touch. You press the wool into the grooves with a soft, dabbing motion, working the oil into each tiny valley, and the sound is a faint, sticky whisper that repeats and fades. You oil the hinge area with care, opening and closing the forceps several times while holding the wool against the joint, and the oil seeps into the hidden surfaces where the two arms meet, ensuring that the movement will remain smooth and silent. When you set the forceps down, they lie open and gleaming, their arms relaxed and their tips shining. The sharp hook is the smallest instrument, and its curved point requires the most careful handling. You fold the wool into a tiny, precise cone and dip the very tip into the oil, then use it to trace the inside of the hook's curve with a slow, deliberate stroke. The oil catches the light and forms a thin, liquid bead that runs along the curve before settling into an even film, and the bronze darkens to a deep, almost blackish brown, the color of strong tea held up to the light. You oil the straight shaft with a single smooth pass, and then you set the hook back on the cloth, its curve facing away from you, and it rests there like a small dark comma against the pale linen. The bone laver, being the largest and heaviest instrument, requires both hands and a generous amount of oil. You dip the wool into the dish and let it soak up a full measure, then hold the laver by its egg-shaped handle and apply the oil to the broad, flat end. The surface is wide and smooth, and the oil spreads across it in a slow, sweeping wave that follows the motion of your hand, the bronze deepening from a dark, smoky patina to a rich, velvety brown that seems to absorb the lamplight rather than reflect it. You cover every part of the flat end, working the oil into the very edges with a careful circular motion, and then you turn the lever over and oil the other side, watching the color bloom and settle. The handle is oiled last, and you buff it with the wool until it glows with a soft, warm radiance that feels smooth and dry under your fingers despite the oil. You set the lever on the cloth, and its weight presses the linen flat, the oiled surface gleaming softly. The fine-toothed comb is the last instrument, and you take extra care to ensure that each tooth receives a thin, even coat of oil. You fold the wool into a small flat pad and dip it into the oil, then press it gently against the row of teeth, moving from one end to the other in a single, continuous stroke. The oil fills the tiny spaces between the teeth, each gap holding a minuscule bead of golden liquid that catches the lamplight and sparkles like a string of tiny gems. You turn the comb over and oil the smooth back with a broader stroke, and the bronze darkens to a pale honeyed brown, the teeth now gleaming with a soft, uniform shine. You set the comb on the cloth at the end of the row, and all the instruments now rest together, their surfaces oiled and glowing with a deep, protective luster. You dip the wool one last time and use it to wipe your own hands, spreading the remaining oil over your fingers and palms. The oil is warm and soothing, and it leaves your skin feeling soft and smooth, with a faint, pleasant fragrance that will linger for hours. You set the oiled wool aside on the edge of the dish, where it will be ready for the next evening, and then you lift the shallow dish and hold it up to the lamp. The thin layer of oil remaining in the dish is a perfect golden circle, clear and still, and it reflects the flame as a tiny, trembling star. You carry the dish to the shelf and place it there, where it will sit undisturbed until it is needed again. You return to the table and look at the row of oiled instruments. The transformation is complete. Each tool now glows with a deep, warm radiance. The bronze no longer pale and dry, but rich and luminous, as though each piece has been dipped in liquid amber. The lamplight plays across the surfaces, sliding from blade to handle to curve, and the room is filled with the gentle, fruity scent of olive oil, a smell that speaks of sun and earth and ancient groves, a smell that is both calming and familiar. You reach out and touch the larger scalpel with your fingertip, feeling the smooth, slightly tacky film of oil, and you know that the metal is now protected, sealed against the damp air and the slow creep of tarnish, ready to be put away until it is needed again. You let your hand fall back into your lap, and you sit still for a long moment, simply looking at the instruments. They are beautiful in their quiet, ordinary way. Not beautiful like a piece of jewelry or a painted vase, but beautiful like a well-made tool that has served faithfully and been cared for in return. The oiling has been a slow, meditative act, and you feel the gentle, lingering calm that always follows it, a calm that settles into your bones like the warmth of the sun on a cool afternoon. The lamp burns on, the flame steady and upright, and the night outside the high window is deep and dark and utterly silent. You are in no hurry to move, and so you remain seated, your hands resting lightly on your thighs, your breathing slow and even, while the oiled bronze gleams softly in the golden light. The oiled instruments rest on the linen cloth in a quiet, gleaming row, their bronze surfaces still holding that deep, protective luster you have just given them. The lamp burns on, its flame a steady, upright leaf of gold, and the room has grown so still that you can hear the faint, intermittent creak of the cooling roof tiles outside. You look at the two scalpels, the larger leaf-shaped blade and its smaller curved companion, and you notice something that only your fingers would know. The edges, while still perfectly serviceable, have lost the very finest whisper of their bite. They are not dull, merely ready for a few careful passes on a stone, a gentle refreshment that you perform not because it is urgent, but because the evening offers the time and the quiet concentration that such a task deserves. You reach for the wooden box that sits on the lower shelf, the one that holds your small whetstone, and you bring it to the table. The box is made of dark seasoned cedar, its lid fitted with simple wooden pegs, and it slides open with a soft dry rasp. Inside, cradled in a bed of scrap wool, lies the whetstone. You lift it out with both hands, feeling its familiar dense weight. The stone is palm-sized, a rectangular block no longer than your thumb and twice as wide, cut from fine-grained dark stone that was quarried somewhere far away and traded through many hands before it reached this quiet town. Its color is a deep charcoal gray with a faint bluish cast, like the color of a rain cloud just before dusk, and tiny flecks of lighter mineral glint when you turn it under the lamplight. One face of the stone is perfectly flat and smooth from countless sharpenings, while the other sides are left slightly rougher, their texture a pleasant sandy grit under your fingertips. The stone has a cool, almost silky feel, and it carries the faint, clean scent of oil from its last use, a scent that mingles with the olive oil already in the air. You set the whetstone on the linen cloth in front of you, positioning it so that the flat face is upward and the long edge runs parallel to the table's edge. The stone sits squarely on the cloth. its weight keeping it from shifting, and you press on it gently with your palm to ensure it is stable. Then you reach for the shallow dish of olive oil that still sits on the shelf, the one you used for oiling the instruments, and you bring it to the table. A thin layer of oil remains, barely enough to cover the bottom, and you dip the tip of your finger into it, lifting a small, glistening bead. You let the oil drip onto the center of the stone, where it forms a tiny trembling pool, and then you use your finger to spread it in a thin, even film across the entire flat surface. The oil darkens the stone immediately, turning it from charcoal gray to a deep, almost black shade, and the fine flecks of mineral disappear into the wet surface. The scent of olive oil rises again, warm and clean, and you set the dish aside. Now you pick up the larger scalpel, the one with the leaf-shaped blade, and you hold it in your right hand, as you have held it 1,000 times before. Your fingers curl around the handle with a relaxed, natural grip, the bronze warm from the oiling, and your thumb rests along the flat of the blade just above the handle, not on the edge, but on the side, where it can guide and steady the tool. You look at the blade in the lamplight, tilting it to catch the reflection along the cutting edge, and you see the faint, almost invisible line where the previous sharpening marks end and the very tip of the edge begins, a line that is slightly more reflective than the rest of the blade. It is this line that you will refresh, not to create a new edge, but to restore the tiny microscopic teeth that do the quiet work of parting skin and tissue when needed. You place the blade against the stone at a low angle, so shallow that the blade almost lies flat, the heel of the cutting edge just touching the oiled surface. The angle is one you know by heart, a position that your hands remember without thought. It is the angle at which the stone can kiss the very edge of the metal without biting into the softer bronze behind it. You begin the first pass. You draw the blade toward you across the stone in a smooth, steady motion, the entire length of the cutting edge moving from heel to point as your hand travels backward. The sound is a whisper-soft hiss, a sound so fine and delicate that it seems to belong more to the air than to the stone, a sound like silk being drawn over smooth wood. You feel the gentle, even resistance through the handle, a faint vibration that tells you the stone is doing its work, removing the tiniest layer of oxidized metal and revealing the fresh bronze beneath. The oil on the stone darkens with microscopic particles, and a very faint dark line appears on the oil surface where the blade has passed. You lift the blade at the end of the stroke, turn it over, and place the other side against the stone at the same shallow angle. Then you push the blade away from you, drawing it across the stone from heel to point in the opposite direction, and the whisper-soft sound repeats, the same fine hiss, the same gentle resistance. You have made one pass on each side, and you count silently. A simple, wordless tally in the back of your mind. The motion is slow and rhythmic, and you do not hurry. Each stroke takes as long as a calm breath, and you let your breathing fall into the same steady pace as your hands. You make a second pass, drawing the blade towards you on the first side and then pushing it away on the second, and the stone continues its quiet work. The oil on the surface has now taken on a faint greyish tinge, the colour of the finest, lightest ash, and the metal particles suspended in it catch the lamplight in a barely perceptible sparkle when you tilt the stone. You make a third pass, a fourth, a fifth, and with each stroke you feel the blade becoming ever so slightly keener under your fingers, though the change is too subtle to see. You only know it through the sound, which grows slightly cleaner and higher pitched as the edge refines, and through the feel of the stone, which seems to grip the blade less and glide beneath it more as the surface polishes. You pause after the 7th pass and lift the blade to the lamplight, turning it slowly. The cutting edge now shows a thin, bright line, a ribbon of newly exposed bronze that runs unbroken from heel to point, and it gleams with a clean, silvery light inside the deeper gold of the oiled blade. You bring the blade close to your face, not to inspect it with anxiety, but simply to admire the quiet result of your work, and then you test the edge in the way you always do. You place the flat of your thumb, never the pad, never the edge itself, lightly against the side of the blade, just behind the cutting edge, and you stroke it very gently, feeling the faint, even texture of the freshly honed metal. It is not rough, not sharp to the touch in a way that threatens, but smooth and regular, like the surface of a fine-toothed file scaled down to invisibility. The edge is ready. You set the larger scalpel back on the linen cloth, its blade now refreshed and gleaming, and you turn your attention to the smaller scalpel. Its curved belly requires a slightly different motion on the stone, one that follows the arc of the blade, and you take a moment to study the curve before you begin. The cutting edge runs from the heel near the handle, sweeps outward in a gentle convex curve, and then tapers back to the point, and you know that you must roll the blade slightly as you draw it across the stone to keep the entire edge in contact with the flat surface at the proper angle. This is a skill that took you many months to learn when you were young, a skill that is now as natural as stirring a pot or tying a knot, and you do not think about it consciously. Your hands simply know what to do. You refresh the oil on the whetstone with another tiny drop from the dish, spreading it with your fingertip until the surface is once again a dark, glossy pool, and then you pick up the smaller scalpel. You hold it with the same relaxed grip, your thumb resting on the flat of the blade, and you place the heel of the cutting edge against the stone at the shallow, familiar angle. You begin the first pass, drawing the blade towards you as before, but this time you roll your wrist very slightly as the blade moves, following the curve so that the entire edge, from heel to point, kisses the stone in a continuous, unbroken motion. The whisper-soft sound returns, but it is subtly different. It rises and falls in pitch as the curve passes over the stone, a gentle, undulating hiss that is almost musical. You complete the stroke, lift the blade, turn it over, and push it away from you on the other side, rolling your wrist in the opposite direction to match the curve. The motion is slow and fluid, a seamless dance of hand and stone and bronze, and you fall into its rhythm as easily as you fall into the rhythm of your own breathing. You count the passes silently, just as you did with the larger scalpel, and you give the smaller blade the same number of strokes on each side. 7 passes, no more, no fewer. The stone surface darkens again with a faint grey tinge, and you see the thin, dark line of oil and metal particles tracing the path of the blade, a path that curbs gently across the stone. After the 7th pass, you lift the smaller scalpel and inspect it under the lamplight. The bright, silvery line of the refreshed edge runs around the curve in a smooth, uninterrupted arc, and the bronze on either side glows with its oiled golden luster. You test the edge with the flat of your thumb, stroking lightly just behind the cutting surface, and you feel the same fine, even texture that you felt on the larger blade. The edge is ready, and the scalpel is as good as it was when it was first forged. if not better, because it has now been shaped by your own hands and your own quiet patience. You place the smaller scalpel beside the larger one on the cloth, and the two blades lie together, their edges clean and true. The whetstone sits in front of you, its surface smeared with a thin greyish film of used oil, and you reach for a scrap of clean rag that you keep in the box alongside the stone. The rag is an old piece of soft, undyed linen, frayed at the edges but perfectly clean, and you fold it into a small pad. You wipe the stone carefully, drawing the rag across the flat surface in long smooth strokes that lift away the dirty oil and the metal particles, and the stone gradually lightens back to its natural charcoal grey with the faint bluish cast. You wipe the edges and the back, turning the stone over in your hands to make sure no residue remains, and then you hold it up to the lamp. The surface is clean and dry, the tiny mineral flecks once again visible, and the stone is ready to be put away. You set the rag aside and place the whetstone back into its cedar box, nestling it into the bed of wool. The lid slides shut with that same soft, dry rasp, and you return the box to its place on the lower shelf, where it will wait until the next quiet evening calls for it. The shallow dish of olive oil, now nearly empty, is placed back on the shelf as well, and the small glass flask is corked and returned to its spot among the other jars. The table now holds only the instruments, the lamp, the basin, and the folded cloths, and the sharpening tools have disappeared back into the orderly background of the room, leaving no trace of their presence except the freshly honed edges of the two scalpels. You sit down on the stool again, settling your weight comfortably, and you look at the row of instruments. The two scalpels now have a subtle difference that only you would notice. Their cutting edges gleam with a slightly brighter, more silvery light than the rest of the bronze, a light that speaks of readiness and care. The other instruments, the probe, the forceps, the hook, the lever, the comb remain exactly as they were, oiled and glowing, their surfaces smooth and perfect. The lamplight falls across them all, and the room holds the quiet, blended sense of olive oil and clean stone and warm bronze, a scent that is the essence of your work and your evening. You rest your hands in your lap and let your breathing slow. The sharpening was a small task, a tiny interruption in the larger rhythm of the evening, but it has left you with a feeling of quiet completeness. You have given the scalpels a gift of renewed purpose, and in return they have given you the satisfaction of a skill exercised with care. The night outside is as deep and dark as ever, and the world beyond the high window is silent and still. But inside the warm circle of lamplight there is only this: a row of clean, oiled, sharpened tools, a steady flame, and the slow, peaceful beat of your own heart. The instruments lie on the linen cloth in their final, complete arrangement, each piece clean, oiled, and where necessary sharpened, and the lamplight plays across their bronze surfaces in a slow, silent dance that has lasted all evening. The larger scalpel rests beside its smaller companion, their freshly honed edges gleaming with a thin, bright line. The slender probe stretches across the top of the row. The blunt forceps lie open and relaxed. The sharp hook curves in its quiet, patient shape. The heavy bone lever anchors the arrangement with its solid weight, and the fine-toothed cove completes the line with its delicate, even teeth. They are ready now to be wrapped and put away, to return to their leather roll and their wooden box, until the morning brings new small tasks and new quiet hands. You look at them for a long, unhurried moment, letting your eyes travel from one to the next, and you feel a gentle sense of completion, a soft, ordinary satisfaction that has grown throughout the evening and now rests slightly in your chest. The leather instrument roll still lies open on the table, its pale wool lining exposed and its dark brown hide stretched flat. You reach for it with both hands and draw it closer, positioning it directly in front of you so that the open pockets face upward, waiting. The roll has been lying open all this time, and its leather has relaxed, losing the tight curve it usually holds when tied. You smooth the wool lining with your palm, feeling the soft, slightly warm texture, and you run your fingers along the seams of each pocket, checking that nothing is shifted or come loose. The stitches are small and even, done with waxed linen thread in the same steady hand that now prepares to fill them, and they hold the wool firmly against the leather, each pocket shaped exactly to the tool it will cradle. Everything is as it should be. You pick up the larger scalpel first, because it was the first instrument you removed from the roll at the start of the evening, and there is a quiet, natural order to putting things back in reverse. You hold it by the handle, the bronze still faintly warm from your earlier handling, and you slide it gently into its pocket, the blade entering the wool sleeve with a soft, smooth glide. The pocket accepts it without resistance, the wool conforming to the shape of the blade as though it were made anew each time, and the handle remains slightly exposed at the top, just enough for your fingers to grasp when the time comes to draw it out again. You press the flat of the pocket gently with your palm, smoothing the wool over the blade, and then you move to the next instrument. The smaller scalpel goes into its own pocket beside the larger one, its curved belly fitting perfectly into the shaped wool channel that follows its arc. You slide it in slowly, watching the bronze disappear into the pale cream fabric, and then you smooth the pocket flat as well. The two scalpels now rest side by side in the roll, their handles protruding just a little, their blades hidden and protected. The slender probe is placed in its narrow, elongated pocket, the olive tip going in first, and the blunt point remaining visible at the top for a moment, before you tuck it fully inside with a gentle push of your fingertip. The pocket is so slim that the probe barely shifts once it is seated, and the wool holds it straight and true. The blunt forceps require you to close the arms gently before inserting them into their divided pocket. You press the two arms together, feeling the familiar springy resistance, and then you slide the closed forceps into the wool channel. The two sides of the pocket separating the arms just enough to keep them from touching. The forceps settle into place with a faint soft click as the hinge meets the wool, and you smooth the pocket with your fingers, feeling the outline of the bronze beneath. The sharp hook is next, and you take special care with its curved point, guiding it into the slim pocket with the hook facing inward so that it cannot snag the wool or the other instruments. The pocket is short and narrow, just large enough for the handle and the curve, and the hook disappears into it smoothly, leaving only the very end of the handle visible before you tuck that in as well. The bone lever goes into the largest pocket, a wide reinforced sleeve that runs along the bottom edge of the roll. You lift the lever with both hands, its weight familiar and grounding, and you lower it into the pocket, the broad flat end going in first and the egg-shaped handle following. The leather here is slightly thicker and the wool is doubled because the lever is heavier than the other tools and needs extra cushioning to keep it from shifting. You press the pocket flat, feeling the solid, dense shape of the lever through the wool and leather, and then you move to the last instrument. The fine-tooth comb slides into its own slender pocket, the teeth facing inward toward the center of the roll, and you guide it gently with your fingertips until it is fully seated. The wool here is very fine and soft, almost silky, because the teeth are delicate and could catch on coarser fibers, and you take a moment to stroke the pocket smooth, feeling the faint, even ridge of the comb's back beneath your touch. The roll now holds all its instruments, each one in its proper place, and you sit back for a moment to look at the closed pockets, the pale wool dotted here and there with the dark protruding shapes of bronze handles. The arrangement is complete, and the roll is once again a compact, self-contained unit, a quiet store of tools that are being cleaned and cared for, and are now ready to rest. You lift the left edge of the roll and fold it over the instruments, the leather bending easily along its accustomed crease. The soft lining presses gently against the bronze, and you smooth the fold with your palm, working out any small wrinkles. Then you lift the right edge and fold it over the left, overlapping the two sides, so that the roll becomes a neat, compact cylinder, its dark brown leather facing outward and its wool lining hidden inside. The roll is now the shape it was when you first untied it, a simple bundle that fits easily in the hand, and you hold it for a moment, feeling its dense, balanced weight. The leather thong waits on the cloth where you placed it at the beginning of the evening, a thin, supple strip of hide that has been shaped by countless tyings and untyings. You pick it up and wrap it twice around the middle of the roll, pulling it snug but not tight, just enough to keep the roll closed without compressing the instruments inside. The leather slides easily against itself, worn smooth by use, and you tie a simple knot, a single loop, and a tuck that holds securely and comes undone with a single pull. You test the knot gently with your fingertip, and it does not bunch, so you let the loose end trail a short, dark tail against the brown hide. The roll is now closed and bound, as neat and orderly as it was when the day began, and you place it on the table in front of you, its surface catching the lamplight in the soft, diffuse glow. You rise from the stool, your legs moving easily after the long sitting, and you walk to the wooden chest that sits under the shelf. The chest is a simple, sturdy box made of planks of dark wood, its corners joined with dovetail joints, and its lid fitted with simple iron hinges. The wood is worn smooth on the edges where your hands have touched it, and it has a faint, pleasant smell of old cedar and dry herbs. You lift the lid, and it opens with a soft, low creak, the hinges moving easily because you oiled them with the same olive oil you used on the instruments. Inside, the chest is lined with scraps of clean linen, and it holds a few other things. A spare leather roll for larger tools that you rarely use, a small wooden case of needles and thread, and a folded cloth with a few spare bandages. The chest is not crowded, each item has its place, and there is room enough for everything. You take the instrument roll from the table and place it inside the chest, laying it flat on the linen lining so that it will not roll or shift. The roll sits snugly beside the spare, its dark leather a familiar shape in the dim interior of the chest. You adjust its position slightly, centering it between the other items, and then you let your hand rest for a moment on the smooth, cool wood of the chest's edge. The instruments are home now, stored and safe, and they will wait here in the quiet darkness until the next day calls them forth again. You close the lid and the hinges creak once more, a sound that is soft and low and final, and you press the lid down gently to make sure it is seated properly. Now there is only the basin of used water and the waste jar that stands near the door. You pick up the basin, which still holds the faint cloudy residue from the final rinse, and you carry it outside through the door into the porch. The night air meets you again. cooler now than before, and it carries the deep, earthy scent of the garden and the faint, dry perfume of sage that grows near the doorway. The sky overhead is a vast, dark bowl, scattered with stars that are small and bright and very far away, and the silence is so complete that you can hear the faint, distant rustle of a night breeze moving through the olive trees beyond the town. You walk the few steps to the garden pot, a large terracotta container that holds a small bay tree, and you pour the used water onto the soil at its base. The water splashes softly, a dark spreading stain that disappears quickly into the dry earth, and the bay leaves release a faint, spicy fragrance as the water touches them. You stand for a moment, the empty basin in your hands, and you breathe the cool night air, feeling it fill your lungs and then leave again, slow and easy. Then you turn and walk back inside, closing the door behind you with a gentle push. The room is warm after the cool porch, and the lamplight seems brighter now that your eyes have adjusted to the darkness outside. You set the empty basin on the shelf where it belongs, placing it beside the vinegar jar and the other clay vessels, and you wipe your hands on a dry corner of the cloth, though they are not wet. The table is nearly clear now, the instruments gone, the whetstone put away, the oil flask returned to its place. Only the lamp, the linen cloth, and a few small scraps remain, and you will leave those for the morning, because the night is now deep and the evening's work is done. You walk to the lamp and stand beside it, looking down at the small steady flame that has burned all through the slow, quiet hours of your routine. It has used very little oil, and the wick is still long enough to burn for many more hours, but you have no need of it now. The room is ready for darkness, and you are ready for rest. You cup your hand behind the flame, not touching it, just curving your palm around the back of the pottery spout, and you lean down very close. You blow a single soft breath, and the flame extinguishes instantly, leaving behind a thin, curling wisp of smoke that rises and then fades, carrying with it the faint, warm scent of burned oil. The room falls into darkness, a deep, velvety darkness that is not frightening but gentle and complete, like being wrapped in a heavy blanket. You stand still for a moment, letting your eyes adjust, and then the darkness begins to lift very slightly as the faint starlight from the high window seeps into the room. It is not enough to see by, only enough to make the rectangle of the window a shade lighter than the walls, a pale, bluish-grey shape in the blackness. You know the room so well that you can move through it without light, and you walk slowly to your sleeping cot, which sits against the far wall. A simple wooden frame strung with rope and covered with a thick straw mattress. A woolen blanket is folded at the foot of the cot, and you shake it out once, hearing the soft, muffled flapping sound, and then you spread it over the mattress. The blanket is heavy and warm, woven from undyed brown wool, and it smells faintly of lavender from the sprigs you keep in your linen chest. You sit down on the edge of the cot, feeling the straw mattress compress under your weight with a soft, rustling crunch. You remove your sandals, unbuckling the simple leather straps with slow, unhurried fingers, and you set them on the floor beside the cot, aligned neatly. Then you swing your legs up onto the mattress, and you lie back, your head settling onto the small pillow that is stuffed with clean, dried barley husks. The pillow rustles very softly as you adjust it, and then it conforms to the shape of your head, cradling it gently. You pull the blanket up over your body, tucking it around your shoulders, and you feel the warmth begin to gather almost at once, a slow, spreading comfort that sinks into your tired muscles and smooths away the last faint tension of the day. You lie on your back, looking up at the ceiling that you cannot see, and you listen to the silence. It is not a complete silence because the night is never truly silent. From somewhere outside, very far away, comes the soft, rhythmic chirping of a single cricket, its call a steady, pulsing note that rises and falls almost imperceptibly. The sound is so regular and so gentle that it quickly fades from your attention, becoming part of the background, like the sound of your own breathing. The building settles once, a tiny distant creak from the roof beams, and then is still. No wind stirs, no dog barks, no voice calls out. The town sleeps around you, and you sleep with it, or soon will. You close your eyes, and the darkness behind your lids is even deeper than the darkness of the room, a soft, velvety black that seems to go on forever. You let your thoughts drift, not fixing on anything, just allowing them to float up and pass away like the tiny roux particles that drifted in the vinegar jar. You think briefly of the instruments, lying in their leather roll inside the wooden chest, clean and oiled and sharp, and the thought is a quiet, pleasant one that brings a faint smile before it dissolves. You think of the patients who came to you today, their small cuts and scrapes and tired eyes, and you hope, without urgency, that they are sleeping as soundly as you are about to sleep. The thoughts come and go, and none of them demand your attention, and gradually they slow, becoming less frequent, until your mind is as still and quiet as the room. Your breathing deepens, becoming slower and more regular, each inhale and exhale a long, gentle tide that rocks you softly toward the shore of sleep. The weight of the blanket is a comfort, and the slight scratchiness of the wool against your chin is a familiar, grounding sensation that you have known for many nights. The mattress cradles your body, the straw shifting very slightly as you settle, and the pillow supports your head with its quiet, rustling patience. You feel the day's gentle tiredness in your limbs, not an ache, but a pleasant heaviness, and you let it pull you downward, deeper and deeper, into the warm, dark current of rest. Outside, the single cricket continues its steady call, a tiny, persistent pulse in the vast silence of the night, and the stars wheel slowly overhead, unseen but present, their ancient light falling on the roof tiles and the olive trees and the sleeping town. The high window shows nothing but a faint, pale rectangle, the barest suggestion of the sky beyond, and the room is still and dark and peaceful. You are no longer a medicus cleaning surgical tools after sunset. You are simply a person, warm and safe and tired, drifting on the edge of sleep. And then, very softly, without your noticing the exact moment, you cross that edge, and the night holds you in its quiet, gentle arms, and the story ends.